The transformation of human society from nomadic hunter-gatherer bands to settled agricultural communities represents one of the most profound shifts in human history, and nowhere is this transition more clearly documented than in the ancient Near East. Around 10,000 BCE, as the last ice age retreated and global temperatures stabilized, the region that would later become known as Mesopotamia experienced dramatic environmental changes that set the stage for humanity's first experiment with civilization. The Fertile Crescent, stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern-day Iraq and Syria to the Mediterranean coast, emerged as a natural laboratory for agricultural innovation. This crescent-shaped region possessed several critical advantages that made it ideal for early farming communities. The area's diverse topography included river valleys, rolling hills, and coastal plains, each supporting different types of vegetation and wildlife. Wild cereals such as emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, and barley grew naturally in these upland areas, while wild legumes like lentils, peas, and chickpeas provided essential protein sources. The presence of wild ancestors of domesticated animals, including sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs, created opportunities for animal husbandry that would prove essential to sustainable agriculture. Archaeological evidence from sites like Abu Huraira in northern Syria reveals the gradual transition from hunting and gathering to farming. The inhabitants of this settlement, occupied from approximately 11,500 to 7,000 BCE, initially relied on hunting gazelle and gathering wild cereals. However, analysis of plant remains shows a gradual shift toward cultivated varieties of wheat and barley. The physical evidence tells a compelling story. Grinding stones become more numerous and sophisticated, storage facilities appear, and the remains of domesticated animals increase dramatically in the archaeological record. The process of plant domestication involved subtle but crucial genetic changes. Wild cereals possess brittle rachis, the stem that connects seeds to the plant, which allows seeds to scatter naturally when ripe. Early farmers, perhaps unconsciously, selected plants with tougher rachias that held seeds more firmly, making harvesting easier and more efficient. Over generations, these traits became dominant, creating crops that were entirely dependent on human cultivation. Similarly, the domestication of animals involved selecting for traits like docility, reduced brain size, and retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. Climate data from ice cores and pollen analysis indicates that the early Holocene period brought increased rainfall and more stable seasonal patterns to the region. This climatic stability allowed experimental farmers to develop reliable agricultural techniques without the constant threat of environmental catastrophe. The development of agriculture was not a sudden revolution, but rather a gradual process spanning several millennia, with communities moving back and forth between farming and foraging as circumstances demanded. The establishment of permanent settlements required new forms of social organization and technology. Early farming communities needed to coordinate planting and harvesting activities, manage food storage, and resolve disputes over land and resources. Archaeological evidence from sites like Jarmo in the Zagros Mountains shows increasingly sophisticated architecture, with rectangular houses built of packed mud and stone foundations. These structures, dating to around 7,000 BCE, contain multiple rooms, storage areas, and evidence of craft specialization in the form of pottery kilns and tool-making workshops. The development of pottery technology marked a crucial advancement in food storage and preparation. Early ceramic vessels allowed communities to store surplus grain for extended periods, cook foods more efficiently, and transport liquids over long distances. The pottery from sites like Hassuna and Samarra, dating to the 6th millennium BCE, displays increasingly sophisticated decorative techniques and standardized forms, suggesting the emergence of specialized craftspeople and established trade networks. As agricultural communities became more established, population growth and resource management challenges led to one of the most significant technological innovations in human history: irrigation agriculture. The alluvial plains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers presented both opportunities and challenges for early farmers. While the annual flooding deposited rich, fertile silt across the landscape, the irregular timing and intensity of floods made farming unpredictable and often dangerous. The earliest irrigation systems in Mesopotamia were relatively simple affairs, small channels dug to divert water from rivers to nearby fields during the growing season. Archaeological evidence from sites like Chogamami, dating to around 6000 BCE, shows clear evidence of these early irrigation works. Aerial photography and ground surveys have revealed ancient field systems with regular patterns of channels and basins that could only have been created through coordinated human effort. The construction and maintenance of irrigation systems required unprecedented levels of cooperation and social organisation. Communities had to coordinate the timing of water distribution, maintain channels and levees, and resolve conflicts over water rights. This necessity for collective action contributed to the development of more complex social hierarchies and administrative systems. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain individuals or families began to accumulate greater wealth and status, possibly through their roles in managing irrigation works or controlling access to the most productive agricultural land. The impact of irrigation on settlement patterns was profound and lasting. Villages that had previously been scattered across the landscape began to cluster along major waterways and irrigation channels. The increased agricultural productivity made possible by controlled irrigation supported larger populations and allowed for greater specialization of labor. Some community members could devote their time to activities other than food production, leading to advances in crafts, technology and trade. The Ubaid period, spanning roughly 6,500 to 3,800 BCE, witnessed the emergence of the first proto-urban centres in southern Mesopotamia. These settlements, while still primarily agricultural, displayed characteristics that would later define Mesopotamian cities: monumental architecture, clear evidence of social stratification, and extensive trade networks. The site of Eridu, traditionally considered the first city in Mesopotamian mythology, shows continuous occupation from the early Ubaid period and contains the remains of what may be the earliest known temple complex in the region. Tel Es-Sorwan, located along the Tigris River in central Iraq, provides exceptional insight into the social and economic organisation of Ubaid period communities. Excavations at this site have revealed a settlement surrounded by a defensive wall and ditch, suggesting that these early urban centres faced security challenges that required collective defence measures. The architecture within the settlement shows clear evidence of social differentiation, with larger, more elaborate houses clustered in certain areas while smaller, simpler structures occupied other zones. The material culture from Tel Es-Sorwan demonstrates the increasing sophistication of Ubaid period craftsmanship. Pottery vessels display standardized forms and decorative motifs that appear across multiple sites, suggesting either widespread cultural exchange or the movement of skilled craftspeople between communities. Stone vessels carved from imported materials indicate long-distance trade relationships, while the presence of copper objects represents some of the earliest metalworking in the region. Chogamami, situated in the Diyala River Valley, provides crucial evidence for the development of irrigation agriculture during the Ubaid period. The site's location in an area that receives insufficient rainfall for dry farming demonstrates that its inhabitants had mastered the techniques of canal irrigation. Excavations have revealed an extensive system of channels and water control structures that allow the community to cultivate crops in an otherwise marginal environment. The social implications of these technological advances become clear when examining the archaeological record more closely. Burial practices at Ubaid sites show increasing differentiation in grave goods and burial treatment, suggesting the emergence of hereditary social classes. Some individuals were interred with elaborate pottery vessels, jewellery and tools, while others received minimal grave goods. This pattern contrasts sharply with earlier Neolithic burials, which typically show much more egalitarian treatment of the deceased. Evidence for craft specialization becomes increasingly apparent during the Ubaid period. Pottery production, in particular, shows signs of standardization and mass production that would have been impossible without dedicated craftspeople. The discovery of pottery kilns, specialized tools, and large quantities of ceramic vessels at sites like Tepe Gawra indicates that certain individuals or families had begun to specialize in ceramic production, trading their products for food and other necessities. The development of long-distance trade networks during this period connected Mesopotamian communities with regions hundreds of miles away. Obsidian from Anatolian sources appears regularly in Ubaid sites, while shells from the Persian Gulf and Mediterranean coast indicate maritime trade connections. Copper ore from the Zagros Mountains and timber from the northern forests required organized expeditions and established trade relationships that extended far beyond local communities. These trade networks facilitated not only the exchange of goods, but also the spread of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. The appearance of similar pottery styles, architectural techniques, and religious symbols across vast distances suggests that Ubaid period communities participated in a shared cultural sphere that transcended local boundaries. This cultural integration laid the groundwork for the more complex civilizations that would emerge in the following millennia. The administrative innovations and trade networks established during the Ubaid period created the foundation for what would become humanity's first urban revolution. As the 4th millennium BCE dawned, the scattered agricultural settlements of southern Mesopotamia began transforming into something unprecedented in human history, true cities. These urban centres, emerging from the rich alluvial soil between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, represented a quantum leap in social organisation, technological innovation, and cultural complexity that would define civilization for millennia to come. The transition from Ubaid villages to Sumerian city-states occurred gradually but decisively between 3800 and 3500 BCE, during what archaeologists term the Uruk period. This transformation was not merely a matter of increased population density, but represented a fundamental reorganization of human society. The driving forces behind this urban revolution were multifaceted: continued population growth, intensification of agricultural production through expanded irrigation systems, increasing craft specialization, and the need for more sophisticated administrative systems to manage these complex interactions. Uruk, located in the heart of the southern Mesopotamian alluvium, emerged as the world's first true city during this period. By 3200 BCE, Uruk had grown to encompass nearly 600 hectares and supported a population estimated between 40,000 and 50,000 inhabitants. The sheer scale of this settlement dwarfed anything previously seen in human history. Archaeological excavations at the site have revealed massive public buildings, extensive residential quarters, and sophisticated infrastructure that required unprecedented levels of planning and coordination to construct and maintain. The urban landscape of early Uruk was dominated by two massive temple complexes: the Anu precinct, dedicated to the sky god Anu, and the Inanna precinct, associated with the goddess Inanna. These structures were not merely religious buildings, but served as the economic and administrative centres of the city. The Anu ziggurat, rising approximately 13 metres above the surrounding plain, represented one of humanity's first attempts at monumental architecture. Its construction required the coordinated labour of thousands of workers, sophisticated engineering knowledge, and a complex supply chain to transport materials from distant sources. The Inanna complex covered nearly 9 hectares and contained multiple temples, administrative buildings, and storage facilities. The famous limestone temple, constructed around 3300 BCE, featured walls decorated with elaborate stone mosaics depicting processions of priests and offerings to the gods. These decorative elements, created from carefully shaped limestone cones inserted into bitumen, required skilled craftspeople and demonstrated the city's ability to support non-agricultural specialists on an unprecedented scale. Contemporaneous with Uruk's rise, other major urban centres emerged across the Mesopotamian landscape. Situated near the ancient coastline of the Persian Gulf, developed into a major commercial hub that controlled maritime trade routes extending to the Indus Valley and beyond. The city's strategic location allowed its merchants to import luxury goods, including lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, and silver from Anatolia. Archaeological evidence from the royal cemetery at dating to the early dynastic period, reveals the extraordinary wealth accumulated by the city's elite through these extensive trade networks. Lagash, located in the eastern part of the Mesopotamian alluvium, became renowned for its advanced agricultural techniques and sophisticated irrigation systems. The city controlled an extensive network of canals that transformed thousands of hectares of marginal land into productive farmland. Cuneiform records from later periods describe the complex administrative systems required to manage water distribution, resolve disputes between farmers, and coordinate the massive labour forces needed for canal maintenance. Eridu, revered in later Mesopotamian tradition as the first city ever created, occupied a crucial position in the developing urban hierarchy. Although smaller than Uruk or Eridu's temple complex served as a religious centre for the entire region. The city's priests claimed direct descent from the primordial gods and maintained elaborate rituals that legitimized the political authority of rulers throughout Mesopotamia. Archaeological excavations have revealed 18 successive temple buildings at the site, each constructed directly above its predecessor, creating a continuous sacred space that spanned nearly 2 millennia. The emergence of these city-states coincided with one of humanity's most revolutionary innovations, the development of writing. The earliest known written documents, dating to approximately 3200 BCE, were discovered in the Iana precinct at Uruk. These clay tablets, inscribed with a system of pictographic symbols, represent the first successful attempt to record human language in permanent form. The implications of this breakthrough cannot be overstated. Writing transformed human society by enabling the preservation and transmission of knowledge across generations and vast distances. The evolution of cuneiform writing from its pictographic origins to a sophisticated system capable of recording complex ideas and abstract concepts occurred over several centuries. The earliest tablets contained simple pictograms representing concrete objects: a bull's head for cattle, a barley stalk for grain, or a human head for a person. These symbols were pressed into clay using reed styluses, creating the characteristic wedge-shaped marks that gave cuneiform its name. As administrative needs became more complex, scribes began developing methods to represent abstract concepts and grammatical elements. The breakthrough came with the discovery that pictographic symbols could represent not just objects but also sounds. A symbol originally representing a physical object could be used to write any word that sounded similar, regardless of meaning. This rebus principle allowed scribes to record the full range of human language, including proper names, verb tenses, and complex grammatical relationships. The standardization of cuneiform writing required extensive training and created a new professional class of scribes who wielded enormous influence in Mesopotamian society. Scribal schools, known as edubas, emerged in major cities to train young men in the complex art of reading and writing. These institutions developed sophisticated curricula that included not only writing techniques but also mathematics, literature, law, and religious instruction. The scribes who graduated from these schools became the backbone of Mesopotamian administration, serving as record keepers, tax collectors, legal clerks, and diplomatic correspondents. The religious worldview that underpinned Sumerian civilization was as sophisticated as its technological achievements. Sumerian cosmology envisioned the universe as a complex hierarchy of divine beings who controlled every aspect of natural and human existence. At the apex of this pantheon stood the great gods: Anu, the sky god and ultimate source of divine authority; Enlil, the lord of wind and storm who controlled the fate of humanity; and Ea, the god of fresh water and wisdom who served as humanity's protector and benefactor. Below these supreme deities existed hundreds of lesser gods, each responsible for specific aspects of the natural world or human society. Every city had its patron deity who resided in the central temple complex and served as the city's divine ruler. The relationship between gods and humans was conceived as fundamentally economic. Humans existed to serve the gods through offerings, rituals, and the maintenance of their earthly dwelling places, while the gods provided protection, prosperity, and the continuation of cosmic order. The ziggurat, the most distinctive architectural form of Mesopotamian civilization, embodied this religious worldview in physical form. These massive stepped pyramids, constructed of mud brick and rising up to 90 meters in height, served as artificial mountains that connected the earthly realm with the divine sphere above. The ziggurat's summit housed a small temple where the city's patron deity was believed to reside, accessible only to the highest-ranking priests who performed daily rituals to maintain the god's favour. The construction of ziggurats required extraordinary organisational capabilities and represented some of the largest construction projects undertaken by ancient societies. The Anu ziggurat at Uruk, for example, contained approximately 140,000 cubic meters of mud brick, each brick individually moulded, dried, and laid by hand. The logistics of organising the workforce, procuring materials, and coordinating construction activities across multiple years demanded administrative systems of unprecedented sophistication. The priest-kings who ruled early Sumerian cities derived their authority from their role as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. These rulers, known by the Sumerian title En, served simultaneously as high priests of the city's patron deity and as secular administrators responsible for maintaining order and prosperity. The concentration of religious and political authority in a single individual created a form of government that was both theocratic and bureaucratic, combining divine legitimacy with practical administrative capability. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Sumerian rulers lived in palace complexes that were integrated with temple precincts, physically embodying the connection between divine and earthly authority. These structures contained not only residential quarters for the ruler and his family, but also administrative offices, storage facilities, workshops, and audience halls where the business of government was conducted. The famous Standard of dating to approximately 2600 BCE, depicts the ruler presiding over elaborate banquets while receiving tribute from his subjects, illustrating the ceremonial aspects of early Mesopotamian kingship. The technological innovations that emerged from Sumerian cities transformed not only Mesopotamian society, but had far-reaching impacts on human civilization as a whole. The invention of the wheel, traditionally dated to around 3500 BCE, revolutionized transportation and manufacturing throughout the ancient world. The earliest wheels were solid wooden discs attached to axles, used initially for pottery production and later adapted for wheeled vehicles. Archaeological evidence from Uruk includes both potters' wheels and the remains of wheeled carts, demonstrating the rapid adoption of this transformative technology. The development of sailboat technology enabled Mesopotamian merchants to extend their trade networks far beyond the reach of overland caravans. Early boats were constructed from bundled reeds waterproofed with bitumen, a natural petroleum product abundant in the region. These vessels, propelled by both oars and simple square sails, could carry substantial cargoes along the region's rivers and canals. Cylinder seals from the period depict boats loaded with goods, indicating that waterborne commerce had become integral to the Mesopotamian economy. Bronze metallurgy, developed through the combination of copper and tin, provided Mesopotamian craftspeople with a material superior to pure copper for tool and weapon production. Bronze implements were harder, more durable, and could be cast into more complex shapes than their copper predecessors. The technology required sophisticated knowledge of ore processing, alloying techniques, and casting methods that were closely guarded trade secrets. The control of bronze production became a source of significant economic and military advantage for cities that mastered these techniques. The agricultural innovations that supported urban populations included the development of the seed plough, which allowed farmers to plant crops more efficiently and at optimal depths. This tool, pulled by oxen and operated by a single farmer, could prepare and plant fields much more quickly than traditional hand tools. The increased efficiency of agricultural production freed labour for other activities and supported the craft specialisation that characterised urban society. Mesopotamian cities also pioneered new forms of economic organisation that would influence commercial practices for millennia. The temple complexes served as the earliest known examples of centralised economic management, controlling vast agricultural estates, craft workshops, and trade operations. Temple administrators developed sophisticated accounting systems using cuneiform records to track production, distribution, and exchange of goods across complex supply chains. The emergence of private merchants operating independently of temple or palace authority represented another crucial development in economic organisation. These entrepreneurs, known as tamkaru, established trading partnerships that extended across vast distances and cultural boundaries. They developed standardised weights and measures, created credit systems that enabled long-distance commerce, and established commercial law codes that governed business relationships. The sophisticated merchant networks and administrative systems that had developed within individual Sumerian city-states during the early dynastic period created the economic and organisational foundations for an entirely new form of political organisation. Around 2334 BCE, a revolutionary leader emerged who would transform the fragmented landscape of competing city-states into humanity's first multi-ethnic empire. This figure, known to history as Sargon of Akkad, initiated a period of unprecedented territorial expansion and cultural synthesis that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of Mesopotamian civilization. Sargon's origins remain shrouded in legend, but archaeological evidence and later historical records suggest he rose from humble beginnings in the northern Mesopotamian city of Kish. The Akkadian territories, located in the region north of Sumer proper, had long served as a cultural bridge between the Sumerian south and the broader Semitic populations of Syria and the Levant. This geographic position provided Akkadian leaders with unique advantages, access to both Sumerian administrative techniques and the military traditions of nomadic Semitic peoples who had been pressing against Mesopotamian borders for centuries. The political landscape that Sargon confronted consisted of numerous independent city-states, each controlling agricultural territories and trade routes within relatively limited geographic boundaries. Dominated maritime commerce through the Persian Gulf, while Lagash controlled extensive irrigation networks in the eastern alluvium. Uruk maintained its position as a major religious and cultural centre, and Umma competed fiercely with Lagash over water rights and territorial boundaries. This fragmentation, while fostering innovation and cultural development within individual cities, created military vulnerabilities that a unified force could exploit. Sargon's initial campaigns targeted the most powerful Sumerian rulers of his era. His first major victory came against Lugal-Zaggisi of Umma, who had recently conquered Uruk and established himself as the dominant power in southern Mesopotamia. The Battle of Uruk, fought around 2334 BCE, demonstrated the superior military capabilities that would characterize Akkadian warfare. Sargon's forces employed composite bows constructed from wood, horn, and sinew that could penetrate bronze armour at distances far exceeding traditional Sumerian weaponry. These bows, adapted from designs used by nomadic peoples of the northern steppes, provided Akkadian archers with decisive advantages in both siege warfare and open field engagements. The Akkadian military machine that emerged under Sargon's leadership represented a synthesis of Mesopotamian organisational capabilities with innovative tactical approaches borrowed from diverse cultural traditions. Professional soldiers, maintained through regular payments rather than seasonal conscription, formed the core of Akkadian armies. These troops underwent extensive training in coordinated manoeuvres, siege techniques, and the use of specialised equipment that gave them substantial advantages over traditional city-state militias. Akkadian siege warfare incorporated technological innovations that revolutionised the conduct of military operations. Mobile siege towers, constructed from timber and reinforced with bronze fittings, allowed attackers to approach city walls while protected from defensive fire. Battering rams, operated by teams of soldiers working in coordinated shifts, could breach gates and wall sections that had previously been considered impregnable. The systematic use of undermining techniques, where engineers dug tunnels beneath fortifications to collapse wall sections, demonstrated the sophisticated engineering knowledge available to Akkadian commanders. The conquest of individual Sumerian cities required not only military victory, but also the establishment of administrative systems capable of integrating diverse populations under unified control. Sargon's approach to governance represented a remarkable innovation in imperial administration. Rather than simply extracting tribute from conquered territories, the Akkadian system incorporated local elites into imperial hierarchies while maintaining essential aspects of traditional city-state organisation. Akkadian governors, typically drawn from Sargon's extended family or trusted military commanders, were installed in major cities to oversee imperial interests. These officials worked alongside traditional temple administrators and local merchants to maintain economic productivity while ensuring loyalty to the central government. The system balanced imperial control with local autonomy, allowing conquered cities to maintain their religious traditions and commercial practices while contributing to the broader imperial economy. The standardization of weights and measures across the Akkadian Empire facilitated unprecedented levels of commercial integration. Bronze weight standards, manufactured in central workshops and distributed throughout imperial territories, ensured that merchants could conduct business across vast distances without the complications of multiple measurement systems. Standardized capacity measures for grain, oil and other commodities eliminated many sources of commercial disputes and enabled the development of more sophisticated credit and banking systems. The adoption of Akkadian as the empire's administrative language created the world's first true lingua franca. While local populations continued to speak their native languages in daily life, official documents, legal proceedings and commercial contracts were conducted in Akkadian using cuneiform script. This linguistic standardization enabled the rapid transmission of information across the empire and created a shared cultural framework that transcended ethnic and regional boundaries. Scribal schools throughout the empire taught standardized curricula that included Akkadian grammar, mathematical techniques, legal procedures, and administrative practices. These institutions produced a professional class of administrators who could be transferred between different regions while maintaining consistent governmental standards. The mobility of trained personnel strengthened imperial unity and facilitated the spread of Akkadian cultural influences throughout the conquered territories. The military campaigns that extended Akkadian control beyond traditional Mesopotamian boundaries required logistical capabilities far exceeding anything previously attempted in the ancient world. Sargon's forces reached the Mediterranean coast, establishing control over Syrian cities and securing access to timber resources essential for construction and shipbuilding. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ebla indicates that Akkadian influence extended into regions that had previously maintained only sporadic contact with Mesopotamian civilization. The conquest of Anatolia brought the Akkadians into contact with advanced metallurgical techniques and mineral resources that enhanced their military capabilities. Silver mines in the Taurus Mountains provided the empire with precious metals that facilitated long-distance trade, while copper deposits enabled the mass production of bronze weapons and tools. The integration of Anatolian craftspeople into the imperial economy introduced new technologies and artistic styles that enriched Akkadian material culture. Akkadian expansion into the Zagros Mountains established control over trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with the Iranian Plateau and Central Asia. These mountain passes had long served as conduits for luxury goods, including lapis lazuli, carnelian, and exotic woods that were highly valued in Mesopotamian markets. The establishment of Akkadian garrisons at strategic points along these routes ensured imperial control over this lucrative commerce while providing security for merchant caravans. The cultural synthesis that emerged within the Akkadian Empire represented one of the most significant developments in ancient Near Eastern civilization. Akkadian rulers adopted and adapted Sumerian religious traditions while introducing elements from their own Semitic heritage. The goddess Ishtar, an Akkadian deity associated with love and warfare, became identified with the Sumerian goddess Inanna, creating a composite religious figure that embodied characteristics from both traditions. Akkadian art and literature demonstrated this cultural fusion through the incorporation of Sumerian themes and motifs with distinctly Semitic stylistic elements. The famous victory stele of Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, depicts the ruler ascending a mountain while trampling his enemies underfoot. The composition employs traditional Mesopotamian artistic conventions, while introducing new elements such as the king's divine horned crown and the dramatic landscape setting that reflects Semitic artistic preferences. The development of Akkadian literature during this period produced some of the earliest known works of epic poetry. The legends of Sargon himself, preserved in later copies, established literary conventions that would influence Near Eastern narrative traditions for millennia. These stories, combining historical events with mythological elements, created a new genre of royal literature that celebrated imperial achievements while reinforcing the divine legitimacy of Akkadian rule. Religious syncretism within the empire facilitated the integration of diverse populations while maintaining the essential functions of traditional worship. Local deities were incorporated into the Akkadian pantheon through identification with established Mesopotamian gods, allowing conquered peoples to maintain their religious practices within the imperial framework. This approach reduced resistance to Akkadian rule while creating a more complex and inclusive religious system. The economic integration achieved under Akkadian rule transformed production and distribution systems throughout the empire. Specialized craft workshops, established in major cities, produced goods for empire-wide distribution rather than purely local consumption. Textile production, concentrated in cities with access to raw materials and skilled workers, supplied military units and administrative personnel throughout imperial territories. The standardization of production techniques and quality standards enabled the development of brand recognition and consumer preferences that transcended regional boundaries. Agricultural intensification programs, implemented through imperial investment in irrigation infrastructure, increased food production in marginal areas and supported population growth in strategic regions. The construction of major canal systems, coordinated by imperial engineers and maintained through corvée labour, brought previously unproductive land under cultivation. These projects required sophisticated surveying techniques and hydraulic engineering knowledge that demonstrated the advanced technical capabilities available to Akkadian administrators. The establishment of imperial communication systems enabled rapid information transmission across vast distances. Relay stations, positioned at regular intervals along major routes, maintained supplies of horses and provisions for official messengers. This network, staffed by imperial personnel and protected by military garrisons, ensured that administrative orders and intelligence reports could travel from the capital to distant provinces within weeks rather than months. The Akkadian postal system employed standardized procedures for document authentication and security that prevented forgery and ensured message integrity. Official correspondence was sealed with cylinder seals bearing unique designs that identified the sender and confirmed the document's authenticity. The development of diplomatic protocols governing communication between imperial officials and foreign rulers established precedents that would influence international relations throughout the ancient world. The military innovations that sustained Akkadian expansion included the development of professional officer corps trained in specialized military techniques. These commanders, educated in imperial academies, possessed knowledge of siege warfare, cavalry tactics, and logistical management that exceeded the capabilities of traditional city-state armies. The systematic training of officers created a military culture that emphasized discipline, innovation, and loyalty to imperial authority. Akkadian military engineering capabilities enabled the construction of fortifications and siege equipment that revolutionized warfare throughout the ancient Near East. The development of standardized fortress designs, adapted to local terrain and strategic requirements, created a network of defensive positions that secured imperial borders and protected vital communication routes. These fortifications, constructed using techniques that combined Mesopotamian architectural knowledge, with innovations borrowed from other cultures, demonstrated the empire's ability to adapt and integrate diverse technological traditions. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire around 2154 BCE created a power vacuum that would fundamentally reshape the political landscape of Mesopotamia. The Gutian invasions from the Zagros Mountains had devastated the centralized imperial administration, leaving individual city-states to fend for themselves against both external threats and internal chaos. Trade networks that had connected distant regions under Akkadian rule fragmented into localized systems, while the sophisticated bureaucratic mechanisms that had enabled imperial governance largely disintegrated. Yet from this apparent civilizational collapse emerged what historians now recognize as one of the most remarkable periods of administrative innovation and cultural achievement in ancient Mesopotamian history. The city of strategically positioned near the Persian Gulf and blessed with extensive agricultural territories, emerged as the focal point for Mesopotamian reunification under the leadership of Ur-Nammu around 2112 BCE. Unlike the Akkadian rulers who had built their empire through military conquest of existing city-states, Ur-Nammu approached the challenge of reunification through a combination of diplomatic alliance building, economic incentives, and selective military intervention. His strategy recognized that the traumatic experience of Gutian domination had created a shared desire among Mesopotamian cities for security and stability that could be leveraged to build voluntary cooperation rather than enforced submission. Archaeological evidence from during this period reveals massive construction projects that transformed the city into a worthy capital for a revived Mesopotamian state. The great ziggurat of begun under Ur-Nammu's direction, represented not merely an architectural achievement, but a powerful symbol of renewed Sumerian cultural identity. Rising approximately 21 meters above the surrounding plain and constructed from an estimated 720,000 baked bricks, the ziggurat's construction required the coordinated labor of thousands of workers over multiple years. The structure's three-tiered design, with each level smaller than the one below, created a dramatic stepped silhouette that could be seen from great distances across the flat alluvial landscape. The ziggurat's construction employed innovative architectural techniques that demonstrated the advanced engineering capabilities available to Ur's builders. The core structure consisted of sun-dried mud bricks, while the exterior walls were faced with fired bricks, set in bitumen mortar for weather resistance. Drainage systems built into the structure prevented water damage, while carefully calculated buttresses and internal chambers distributed the enormous weight of the upper levels. The precision of the construction is evident in the structure's survival largely intact for over 4 millennia, testament to the sophisticated mathematical and engineering knowledge possessed by Ur's architects. Ur-Nammu's approach to territorial expansion differed markedly from his Akkadian predecessors. Rather than conducting rapid military campaigns designed to overwhelm opposition, he pursued a methodical strategy of gradual integration that respected local traditions while establishing unified administrative standards. Cities that accepted Ur's hegemony voluntarily were allowed to maintain their traditional ruling families and religious practices, while those that resisted faced targeted military intervention, followed by generous reconstruction assistance. This carrot-and-stick approach proved remarkably effective in building lasting loyalty among previously independent city-states. The integration of Lagash provides an excellent example of Ur-Nammu's diplomatic skill. This powerful city-state, with its extensive irrigation networks and productive agricultural territories, had maintained fierce independence throughout the Akkadian period and the subsequent Gutian invasions. Rather than attempting direct conquest, Ur-Nammu negotiated a marriage alliance between his family and Lagash's ruling dynasty, while simultaneously offering technical assistance for major irrigation projects that would benefit both cities. The resulting agreement granted Ur control over Lagash's foreign relations and military forces while preserving local autonomy in domestic affairs. The successful integration of Nippur, the traditional religious centre of Mesopotamia, proved crucial to establishing the legitimacy of Ur's reunification efforts. Nippur's priests controlled the cult of Enlil, the paramount deity of the Mesopotamian pantheon, and their recognition of any ruler's authority carried enormous weight throughout the region. Ur-Nammu's generous patronage of Nippur's temples, combined with his restoration of traditional religious festivals that had been disrupted during the Gutian period, secured priestly support for his expanding authority. The formal recognition of Ur-Nammu as king of Sumer and Akkad by Nippur's religious establishment provided the ideological foundation for his territorial claims. The administrative system that emerged under Ur-Nammu and reached full development under his son Shulgi represented a synthesis of Sumerian traditional governance with innovations borrowed from Akkadian imperial practice. Provincial governors, appointed directly by the king, oversaw major cities and their surrounding territories, while local administrators handled day-to-day governance under provincial supervision. This two-tier system balanced central control with local knowledge, enabling effective administration across diverse regions while maintaining unified policy implementation. The Code of Ur-Nammu, promulgated around 2100 BCE, established the world's earliest known comprehensive legal system. Unlike later legal codes that focus primarily on criminal law and royal prerogatives, Ur-Nammu's code addressed a wide range of civil matters including property rights, marriage and divorce, inheritance, and commercial transactions. The code's 57 surviving provisions demonstrate sophisticated legal reasoning and a commitment to proportional justice that avoided the harsh punishments characteristic of earlier legal systems. The legal innovations contained within Ur-Nammu's code reflected the complex social and economic realities of the reunified Mesopotamian state. Provisions governing irrigation rights addressed the fundamental importance of water management in agricultural society, while regulations concerning craft guilds recognized the growing importance of specialized artisans in urban economies. Commercial law sections established standardized procedures for contracts, credit arrangements, and dispute resolution that facilitated long-distance trade relationships. The code's treatment of social classes reveals the hierarchical structure of a period society, while demonstrating concern for protecting the rights of all citizens. Free citizens, dependent workers, and slaves each received different legal protections and faced different penalties for identical offences, reflecting their varying social status. However, The code also established minimum standards of treatment for all social groups and provided legal mechanisms for slaves to gain freedom through various means including military service and debt payment. Shulgi's ascension to the throne around 2094 BCE marked the beginning of the third dynasty of Ur's golden age. Unlike his father, who had focused primarily on reunification and basic administrative organization, Shulgi possessed both the vision and the resources to transform the Ur state into a sophisticated, bureaucratic machine that surpassed even Akkadian administrative achievements. His 48-year reign provided the stability necessary for implementing comprehensive reforms that touched every aspect of Mesopotamian society. The provincial reorganization implemented under Shulgi divided the empire into approximately 40 administrative districts, each governed by appointed officials responsible directly to the royal court. These provinces, known as Bala districts, were sized to enable effective supervision while maintaining economic viability. Each province contained multiple cities and towns, agricultural territories, and specialized production facilities that contributed to both local needs and imperial requirements. The systematic organization of provincial boundaries according to geographic and economic criteria demonstrated sophisticated understanding of administrative efficiency. The personnel system that staffed this expanded bureaucracy represented one of the most remarkable achievements of ancient administration. Scribal schools, established in major cities throughout the empire, produced trained administrators capable of maintaining the complex records required for effective governance. These schools taught standardized curricula that included mathematics, accounting, legal procedures, and religious instruction, ensuring that graduates possessed the knowledge necessary for competent administrative service, regardless of their posting location. The career advancement system within the Ur bureaucracy provided incentives for competent performance while maintaining loyalty to the central government. Junior administrators began their careers in local positions under experienced supervisors, gradually assuming greater responsibilities as they demonstrated competence and reliability. Promotion to provincial positions required approval from the royal court, while the highest administrative positions were typically reserved for members of the royal family or individuals with demonstrated exceptional ability. The record-keeping systems developed under Shulgi's administration achieved unprecedented levels of detail and accuracy. Clay tablets containing administrative records have been discovered in enormous quantities at sites throughout the former Ur Empire, providing modern historians with extraordinarily detailed information about ancient Mesopotamian society. These records document everything from individual worker rations to major construction projects, creating a comprehensive picture of how the world's first bureaucratic state actually functioned. The standardization of measurement systems throughout the empire facilitated both administrative efficiency and commercial development. Bronze weight standards, manufactured in central workshops and distributed to provincial centers, ensured uniform measurement practices across vast territories. Capacity measures for grain, oil, and other commodities were similarly standardized, eliminating a major source of commercial disputes and enabling the development of sophisticated accounting procedures. The taxation system implemented under Shulgi represented a fundamental innovation in public finance. Rather than relying primarily on tribute payments from subject cities, the Ur state developed systematic taxation based on land productivity, craft production, and commercial activity. Tax assessments were calculated using standardized procedures that took into account local conditions while maintaining equitable treatment across different regions. The resulting revenue streams provided the resources necessary for maintaining the expanded bureaucracy, supporting military forces, and funding major public works projects. The temple estate system that emerged during this period demonstrated the integration of religious and economic functions that characterized Mesopotamian civilization. Major temples controlled vast agricultural territories worked by dependent laborers, while temple workshops produced textiles, metalwork and other goods for both religious and commercial purposes. Temple administrators, trained in the same scribal schools that produce secular bureaucrats, maintained detailed records of production, distribution and exchange that contributed to the overall administrative efficiency of the state. The Dreham Archive, discovered at a site between Nippur and Ur, provides exceptional insight into the operation of temple estates during the Ur period. This facility served as a central collection point for livestock destined for religious sacrifices at major temples throughout the empire. The thousands of tablets found at the site document the movement of cattle, sheep and goats from provincial territories to religious centres, revealing the complex logistical systems required to maintain traditional religious practices on an imperial scale. The agricultural innovations implemented under Ur administration increased food production throughout the empire while supporting population growth in urban centres. New irrigation techniques, including the use of shaduf lifting devices and improved canal design, brought previously marginal lands under cultivation. The systematic planning of agricultural territories, with carefully calculated field sizes and crop rotation schedules, maximised productivity while maintaining soil fertility over extended periods. The craft production systems that developed during this period achieved remarkable levels of specialisation and quality control. Royal workshops, established in major cities, produced luxury goods for the court and high-ranking officials, while maintaining technical standards that influence craft production throughout the empire. The standardization of production techniques, combined with quality control measures enforced by guild organizations, created brand recognition for products from specific centers that extended far beyond imperial boundaries. The textile industry, concentrated in cities with access to raw materials and skilled workers, exemplified the sophisticated production systems of the Ur period. Workshops specializing in different aspects of textile production, spinning, weaving, dyeing and finishing, created complex supply chains that transformed raw wool and flax into finished garments and household goods. The quality and variety of textiles produced during this period, evidenced by surviving examples and detailed administrative records, demonstrate the high level of technical skill achieved by Mesopotamian craftspeople. The trade networks that connected the Ur Empire with distant regions represented a remarkable expansion of commercial relationships that had been disrupted during the post-Akkadian period. Mesopotamian merchants, operating under royal charter and protection, established trading posts in Anatolia, Syria and the Iranian plateau that facilitated the exchange of manufactured goods for raw materials and luxury items. These commercial relationships required sophisticated diplomatic arrangements and legal frameworks that protected merchant interests while respecting the sovereignty of foreign rulers. The Kanesh Trade Archive, discovered in central Anatolia, documents the activities of Mesopotamian merchants who established permanent trading colonies in foreign territories during the Ur period. These merchants, operating under royal protection and following standardized commercial procedures, imported textiles and manufactured goods from Mesopotamia in exchange for silver, copper, and other materials unavailable in the alluvial plains. The detailed records they maintained reveal the complex financial instruments and credit systems that enabled long-distance commerce across cultural and political boundaries. The sophisticated administrative systems and trade networks that had flourished under the third dynasty of Ur began showing signs of strain by the early 20th century BCE. The massive bureaucratic apparatus that Shulgi had constructed required enormous resources to maintain, while external pressures from nomadic groups along the empire's borders created increasing security challenges. The Elamites, based in the Zagros Mountains to the east, had been conducting increasingly bold raids against Mesopotamian territories, while Amorite tribal confederations from the Syrian desert pressed against the empire's western boundaries. These mounting pressures would ultimately contribute to the collapse of centralized Ur authority around 2004 BCE, but the administrative innovations and cultural achievements of the period had created institutional frameworks that would profoundly influence subsequent Mesopotamian civilization. The Amorite migrations that began in earnest during the final decades of rule represented a massive demographic shift that would fundamentally alter the ethnic composition of Mesopotamia. Unlike the Gutian invasions that had destroyed the Akkadian Empire, Amorite infiltration occurred gradually through a combination of peaceful settlement, military service, and commercial activity. These Semitic-speaking peoples, originating from the semi-arid regions of Syria and the northern Arabian Peninsula, possessed pastoral traditions and tribal social structures that differed markedly from the urban-centered civilization of Mesopotamia. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Euphrates River reveals the establishment of Amorite settlements during the late Ur period, often in locations that had been sparsely populated by sedentary communities. These settlements typically featured circular or oval-shaped houses constructed from stone foundations, with mud brick superstructures, architectural styles that reflected nomadic building traditions adapted to permanent habitation. The material culture from these sites demonstrates a gradual adoption of Mesopotamian pottery styles and tool technologies, while maintaining distinctive elements that reflected Amorite cultural identity. The integration of Amorite populations into Mesopotamian society occurred through multiple channels that demonstrated the flexibility of both cultures in adapting to changing circumstances. Amorite warriors, renowned for their skill with composite bows and mobile warfare tactics, were increasingly recruited into Mesopotamian armies as professional soldiers. Their expertise in desert warfare and knowledge of tribal territories proved invaluable for defending against other nomadic incursions, while their service in royal armies provided opportunities for social advancement and cultural assimilation. The collapse of the Ur state around 2004 BCE created opportunities for ambitious Amorite leaders to establish independent kingdoms in former imperial territories. The city of Babylon, previously a minor settlement on the Euphrates River, emerged as the capital of one such Amorite dynasty founded by Sumu-Abum around 1894 BCE. The strategic location of Babylon, positioned at the narrow point between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers where overland trade routes converged, provided significant commercial advantages that enabled the city's rapid growth and increasing political influence. The early Babylonian kingdom established by Sumu-Abum and his successors initially controlled only a limited territory around the city itself, but the dynasty's Amorite origins provided connections to tribal networks that extended far beyond traditional Mesopotamian boundaries. These relationships enabled Babylonian rulers to recruit military forces from allied tribes, while facilitating trade relationships that brought desert products and luxury goods from distant regions into Mesopotamian markets. The synthesis of Amorite tribal traditions with Mesopotamian urban civilization created a distinctive political culture that would characterize the Old Babylonian period. Contemporaneous with Babylon's rise, other Amorite dynasties established themselves in major Mesopotamian cities, creating a complex political landscape of competing kingdoms. Larsa, located in the southern alluvium, became the seat of another powerful Amorite dynasty that controlled extensive agricultural territories and maintained important trade connections with the Persian Gulf region. The rulers of Larsa, including the notable King Rim-Sin who reigned for over 60 years, pursued aggressive expansionist policies that brought them into direct conflict with Babylon and other emerging powers. The Kingdom of Mari, situated on the middle Euphrates River, represented perhaps the most successful example of Amorite political organization during this period. The city's location at the intersection of major trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with Syria and Anatolia provided enormous commercial advantages, while its rulers maintained extensive diplomatic relationships with kingdoms throughout the ancient Near East. The royal palace at Mari, covering over 2.5 hectares and containing more than 300 rooms, demonstrated the wealth and sophistication achieved by Amorite rulers who successfully adapted to urban civilization. The Mari archives, consisting of over 25,000 cuneiform tablets discovered in the palace ruins, provide unprecedented insight into the political, economic, and social conditions of the early 2nd millennium BCE. These documents reveal a complex web of diplomatic relationships, military alliances, and commercial partnerships that connected Mesopotamian kingdoms with distant regions. Letters between rulers discuss everything from marriage negotiations and territorial disputes to trade agreements and military cooperation, illustrating the sophisticated diplomatic culture that had developed among Amorite kingdoms. The military innovations that emerged during the early Old Babylonian period reflected the synthesis of Mesopotamian siege warfare techniques with Amorite mobility and archery skills. Professional armies, maintained by royal treasuries and supplemented by tribal levies during major campaigns, employed combined arms tactics that integrated infantry, archers, and cavalry units. The development of horse-drawn chariots, introduced from northern regions during this period, provided new tactical capabilities that enhanced the effectiveness of mobile warfare. The fortification systems constructed by Old Babylonian kingdoms demonstrated advanced military engineering knowledge adapted to the changing nature of warfare. City walls, built with multiple defensive lines and incorporating projecting towers for enfilading fire, reflected lessons learned from centuries of siege warfare. The walls of Babylon, constructed during the early dynastic period and repeatedly strengthened by successive rulers, featured a double wall system with a water-filled moat that created formidable obstacles for attacking forces. The religious syncretism that characterized the Old Babylonian period created new theological frameworks that integrated Amorite tribal deities with traditional Mesopotamian gods. Marduk, originally a relatively minor deity associated with Babylon, gradually assumed greater prominence as the city's political influence expanded. The elevation of Marduk to the head of the Babylonian pantheon required sophisticated theological arguments that preserved the authority of established gods while asserting the supremacy of Babylon's patron deity. The development of new mythological narratives during this period reflected the changing political and cultural landscape of Mesopotamia. The Enuma Elish, composed during the Old Babylonian period, provided a creation myth that justified Marduk's supremacy through his victory over the primordial chaos goddess Tiamat. This epic, performed annually during the New Year festival, reinforced Babylonian political claims while integrating elements from earlier Sumerian and Akkadian mythological traditions. The reign of Hammurabi, who ascended to the Babylonian throne around 1792 BCE, marked the beginning of Mesopotamia's reunification under Amorite leadership. Unlike his predecessors who had focused primarily on local territorial expansion, Hammurabi possessed both the vision and the resources necessary to challenge the established regional powers and create a unified Mesopotamian state. His early reign was characterized by careful preparation, including the strengthening of Babylon's defenses, the expansion of agricultural territories through irrigation projects, and the cultivation of diplomatic relationships with potential allies. Hammurabi's military campaigns, which began in earnest around 1787 BCE, demonstrated strategic planning and tactical innovation that reflected his understanding of both traditional Mesopotamian warfare and newer military technologies. His first major target was the Kingdom of Larsa, whose control of southern Mesopotamian territories and trade routes posed a direct threat to Babylonian expansion. The siege of Larsa, lasting several months, showcased Hammurabi's ability to coordinate complex military operations while maintaining supply lines across hostile territory. The conquest of Larsa required not only military victory, but also the integration of its extensive administrative apparatus into the expanding Babylonian state. Hammurabi's approach to territorial integration demonstrated sophisticated understanding of imperial governance, combining elements of Akkadian administrative practice with innovations adapted to contemporary conditions. Local officials who demonstrated competence and loyalty were retained in their positions, while new administrative structures were established to ensure central control over key functions, including taxation, military recruitment, and judicial administration. The campaign against Mari, Hammurabi's former ally, illustrated the ruthless pragmatism that characterized his approach to interstate relations. The destruction of Mari around 1761 BCE eliminated a major rival while providing access to the extensive trade networks that the city had controlled. However, the complete destruction of Mari's palace and administrative centre, rather than their integration into the Babylonian system, reflected Hammurabi's recognition that certain rivals posed continuing threats that required elimination rather than incorporation. The Code of Hammurabi, promulgated around 1750 BCE, represented the culmination of Mesopotamian legal development and established principles that would influence legal systems throughout the ancient world. The Code's 282 provisions addressed virtually every aspect of social and economic life, from property rights and commercial transactions to family relationships and criminal justice. The legal principles embodied in the Code reflected both Mesopotamian legal traditions and innovations that addressed the complex social realities of the unified Babylonian state. The famous principle of proportional justice, encapsulated in the phrase "an eye for an eye," represented a significant advance in legal thinking that limited punishment to crimes actually committed rather than allowing unlimited retaliation. This principle, applied throughout the Code's criminal law provisions, established clear relationships between offences and penalties that reduced arbitrary punishment and provided predictable legal outcomes. The Code's detailed provisions governing different social classes demonstrated sophisticated understanding of social hierarchy while establishing minimum standards of treatment for all citizens. The commercial law sections of Hammurabi's Code addressed the complex economic relationships that had developed within the reunified Mesopotamian state. Provisions governing contracts, credit arrangements, and business partnerships provided legal frameworks that facilitated long-distance trade while protecting the interests of all parties involved. The Code's treatment of agricultural relationships, including sharecropping arrangements and irrigation rights, reflected the fundamental importance of farming in Mesopotamian society, while addressing disputes that had historically caused conflict between communities. The administrative systems established under Hammurabi's rule incorporated lessons learned from previous Mesopotamian empires, while introducing innovations that addressed contemporary challenges. Provincial governors, appointed directly by the king and responsible for specific territorial jurisdictions, oversaw local administration while ensuring compliance with royal policies. The integration of traditional city-state administrative structures with imperial oversight created a flexible system that balanced central control with local autonomy. The literary achievements of the Old Babylonian period represented a flowering of Mesopotamian culture that synthesized traditional themes with contemporary concerns. The standard version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, compiled during this period from earlier Sumerian sources, created a unified narrative that explored fundamental questions about human existence, mortality, and the relationship between civilization and nature. The epic's sophisticated literary techniques, including complex characterization and symbolic imagery, demonstrated the high level of artistic achievement reached by Babylonian scribes. The composition of the Epic of Gilgamesh in its standard form required extensive editorial work that combined multiple earlier sources into a coherent narrative structure. The epic's 12 tablets, each containing approximately 300 lines of verse, were carefully organized to create dramatic tension and thematic unity. The story's exploration of friendship, loss, and the search for immortality resonated with contemporary audiences while preserving ancient Mesopotamian cultural values and religious beliefs. The economic structures that supported Old Babylonian society demonstrated the successful integration of urban and rural production systems under unified political control. Agricultural estates, managed by royal administrators or private entrepreneurs, employed sophisticated irrigation techniques and crop rotation systems that maximize productivity while maintaining soil fertility. The standardization of agricultural practices across the kingdom ensured food security while generating surpluses that supported urban populations and craft specialization. The merchant class that emerged during the Old Babylonian period operated within legal frameworks that protected their interests while ensuring royal control over major commercial activities. Royal charters granted trading privileges to specific individuals or organizations, while standardized commercial law provided predictable, legal outcomes for business disputes. The development of sophisticated credit systems, including the use of silver as a standard medium of exchange, facilitated long-distance commerce and enabled the accumulation of capital for investment in productive enterprises. Craft production during the Old Babylonian period achieved remarkable levels of specialization and technical sophistication. Royal workshops, established in major cities, produced luxury goods for the court and high-ranking officials while maintaining technical standards that influenced craft production throughout the kingdom. The organization of craft guilds provided training for skilled artisans while ensuring quality control and fair pricing for manufactured goods. The textile industry, building on traditions established during the Ur period, developed new techniques and products that enhanced Mesopotamian commercial competitiveness. Workshops specializing in different aspects of textile production created complex supply chains that transformed raw materials into finished goods for both domestic consumption and export. The quality and variety of Babylonian textiles, evidenced by surviving examples and administrative records, demonstrate the high level of technical skill achieved by Mesopotamian craftspeople during this period. The gradual decline of Hammurabi's unified Babylonian state created opportunities for new peoples to establish themselves in Mesopotamia's political landscape. Following the devastating Hittite raid on Babylon around 1595 BCE, which effectively ended the Old Babylonian period, a power vacuum emerged that would be filled by the Kassites, a people whose origins lay in the Zagros Mountains of western Iran. Unlike the dramatic conquest that had characterized previous dynastic transitions, the Kassite takeover of Babylon occurred through a gradual process of infiltration, military service, and political maneuvering that demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of Mesopotamian political culture. The Kassites had been present in Mesopotamia for generations before their rise to power, initially serving as mercenaries and auxiliary troops in Babylonian armies. Their mountain origins had provided them with military skills particularly suited to the changing nature of Bronze Age warfare, including expertise in horse training and chariot combat that would prove crucial to their eventual success. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Diyala River Valley shows Kassite settlements dating to the early 18th century BCE, indicating that substantial populations had already established themselves in Mesopotamian territories well before their political ascendancy. The Kassite conquest of Babylon did not follow the pattern of sudden military overthrow that had characterized earlier dynastic changes. Instead, Kassite leaders gradually assumed control of key administrative positions within the weakened Babylonian state, leveraging their military capabilities and political connections to build a power base that eventually enabled them to claim royal authority. This process, extending over several decades, demonstrated remarkable political sophistication and cultural adaptability that would characterize Kassite rule throughout their 4th-century dominance of Mesopotamian politics. Agum Kakrime, traditionally considered the founder of the Kassite dynasty in Babylon, established his authority around 1570 BCE through a combination of military force and diplomatic negotiation. His inscriptions, written in both Akkadian and Kassite languages, reveal a ruler who understood the importance of maintaining continuity with Mesopotamian traditions while introducing innovations that reflected his people's distinct cultural heritage. The recovery of Marduk's statue from the Hittites, accomplished through either diplomatic negotiation or military action, provided powerful symbolic legitimacy for Kassite rule by demonstrating their commitment to Babylonian religious traditions. The establishment of Kassite control over Babylon required the development of new administrative systems that could integrate their tribal leadership structures with the sophisticated bureaucratic apparatus inherited from previous Mesopotamian rulers. The Kassites addressed this challenge by creating a dual administrative system that maintained traditional Mesopotamian governmental functions while incorporating Kassite nobles into positions of authority. This approach preserved the expertise of trained Mesopotamian administrators while ensuring that ultimate political control remained in Kassite hands. The Kassite provincial system divided the kingdom into administrative districts governed by appointed officials who combined traditional Mesopotamian administrative responsibilities with military command functions. These governors, typically drawn from prominent Kassite families, maintained small military forces that could respond rapidly to local threats while serving as the foundation for larger armies during major campaigns. The integration of civilian and military authority in provincial administration reflected the Kassites' understanding that effective governance in the volatile international environment of the Late Bronze Age required constant readiness for military action. The longevity of Kassite rule, spanning over 400 years and representing the longest ruling dynasty in Mesopotamian history, resulted from their ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining core elements of their political and cultural identity. Unlike previous Mesopotamian dynasties that had often faced internal rebellions and succession crises, the Kassites developed stable mechanisms for royal succession that minimized political instability. Their system of co-rulership, where designated heirs assumed increasing responsibilities before formal succession, ensured smooth transitions of power that preserved governmental continuity. The Kassite integration into the international diplomatic system of the Late Bronze Age marked a fundamental transformation in Mesopotamian foreign relations. Previous Mesopotamian empires had typically maintained relationships with neighbouring peoples through conquest, tribute, or trade agreements that reflected clear hierarchical relationships. The Kassites, however, found themselves operating within a multipolar international system where several major powers possessed roughly equivalent military capabilities and territorial resources, requiring new approaches to diplomacy and interstate relations. The Amarna letters, discovered in the Egyptian capital of Akhetaten and dating to the 14th century BCE, provide extraordinary insight into the diplomatic culture that connected the major powers of the Late Bronze Age. These cuneiform tablets, written in Akkadian as the international diplomatic language, reveal a sophisticated system of royal correspondence that maintained peaceful relationships through regular communication, gift exchange, and dynastic marriages. The Kassite king Kadashman-Enlil first appears prominently in this correspondence, negotiating with Egyptian pharaohs as an equal partner in international affairs. The diplomatic protocols revealed in the Amarna archive demonstrate the complex etiquette that governed relationships between late Bronze Age rulers. Royal letters followed standardized formats that began with elaborate greetings and inquiries about the recipient's health and well-being, proceeded through discussions of specific diplomatic issues, and concluded with detailed inventories of gifts being exchanged. The careful attention to protocol and reciprocity reflected the understanding that these relationships depended on mutual respect and balanced exchanges rather than the dominance of one party over another. The Kassite diplomatic relationship with Egypt proved particularly significant for Mesopotamian integration into the broader international system. Egyptian records document regular exchanges of ambassadors, luxury goods, and technical specialists between the two kingdoms, while marriage negotiations between royal families created lasting bonds that transcended immediate political interests. The Egyptian desire for Mesopotamian horses, particularly valued for their size and training, provided the Kassites with a valuable diplomatic leverage that they skillfully exploited to maintain favourable relationships with the most powerful state of the period. The relationship between Kassite Babylon and the Hittite Empire of Anatolia demonstrated the complex balance of cooperation and competition that characterized late Bronze Age diplomacy. Both kingdoms possessed significant military capabilities and territorial ambitions that occasionally brought them into conflict, yet they also shared common interests in maintaining stability and protecting trade routes that benefited both economies. The Kassite-Hittite boundary agreements, negotiated through diplomatic channels and reinforced by marriage alliances, established stable frontiers that endured for centuries. The emergence of Assyria as a major power during the Kassite period created new challenges and opportunities for Mesopotamian diplomacy. The Assyrian kingdom, centered in the northern Mesopotamian city of Ashur, possessed military capabilities and territorial ambitions that directly threatened Kassite interests. However, the shared Mesopotamian cultural heritage of both kingdoms provided foundations for diplomatic cooperation when external threats required unified responses. The complex relationship between Kassite Babylon and Assyria, alternating between alliance and conflict depending on circumstances, demonstrated the sophisticated diplomatic calculations required for survival in the competitive international environment. The military innovations that characterized the Kassite period reflected both their mountain origins and their adaptation to the changing nature of Bronze Age warfare. The Kassites' expertise in horse breeding and training provided them with significant advantages in the development of chariot warfare, which had become the dominant military technology of the late Bronze Age. Their horses, bred in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains, where superior pasturage and climate conditions produced larger and stronger animals, were highly sought after by other powers and provided the Kassites with both military superiority and diplomatic leverage. The Kassite development of chariot warfare represented a synthesis of their traditional military skills with technologies and tactics borrowed from other cultures. Their chariots, constructed from wood and leather with bronze fittings, were designed for speed and maneuverability rather than the heavy assault vehicles favoured by some other powers. The typical Kassite chariot carried a driver and an archer, both protected by bronze armour and equipped with composite bows capable of accurate fire at extended ranges. The coordination required for effective chariot warfare demanded extensive training and created a professional military class that served as the backbone of Kassite armies. The Kassite military organisation integrated traditional Mesopotamian infantry tactics with their innovations in mobile warfare. Infantry units, equipped with bronze weapons and organised into disciplined formations, provided the stability and staying power necessary for siege warfare and defensive operations. The combination of infantry and chariot forces created combined arms capabilities that proved highly effective against both traditional Mesopotamian enemies and the new military challenges posed by other late Bronze Age powers. The fortification systems constructed during the Kassite period demonstrated advanced military engineering knowledge adapted to the requirements of chariot warfare. City walls were redesigned with wider gates and internal ramps that could accommodate chariot traffic, while defensive towers were positioned to provide covering fire for mobile units operating outside the walls. The integration of fixed fortifications with mobile defense capabilities reflected the Kassites' understanding that successful defense required both strong positions and the ability to respond rapidly to changing tactical situations. The cultural developments that occurred under Kassite rule represented a remarkable synthesis of Mesopotamian traditions, with innovations that reflected their distinct heritage and the international influences of the late Bronze Age. The Kassites demonstrated profound respect for Mesopotamian religious traditions, maintaining and expanding major temple complexes while introducing new architectural elements that reflected their own cultural preferences. The reconstruction of Babylon's major temples, undertaken with royal patronage and employing the finest craftsmen available, demonstrated the dynasty's commitment to maintaining their legitimacy through religious observance. The architectural innovations introduced during the Kassite period transformed the appearance of Mesopotamian cities while preserving essential functional elements. The development of new brick-making techniques, including the use of glazed bricks for decorative purposes, created opportunities for more elaborate and colourful architectural decoration. The famous Ishtar Gate of Babylon, while constructed during the later Neo-Babylonian period, employed techniques that were first developed during the Kassite era. The use of moulded brick reliefs depicting animals and mythological figures demonstrated the sophisticated artistic capabilities that emerged from the synthesis of Mesopotamian and Kassite cultural traditions. The temple architecture of the Kassite period reflected both continuity with traditional Mesopotamian religious practices and innovations that addressed contemporary needs. The reconstruction of major temples employed traditional ground plans and orientations, while incorporating new elements such as improved drainage systems, more sophisticated lighting arrangements, and enhanced acoustic properties for religious ceremonies. The use of imported materials, including cedar wood from Lebanon and precious stones from distant sources, demonstrated the international connections that the Kassites had developed and their commitment to creating religious buildings worthy of the gods they served. The economic transformation that occurred under Kassite rule reflected their successful integration into the international trade networks of the Late Bronze Age. The kingdom's strategic location between the Iranian plateau and the Mediterranean coast provided opportunities for commercial activities that generated substantial revenues while connecting Mesopotamian producers with distant markets. The Kassites' diplomatic relationships with major powers facilitated trade by providing security for merchant caravans and establishing standardized commercial procedures that reduced transaction costs. The development of luxury goods production during the Kassite period represented a significant expansion of Mesopotamian manufacturing capabilities. Royal workshops, established in major cities and staffed by skilled craftsmen, produced goods that met the sophisticated demands of international markets while maintaining the quality standards necessary for diplomatic gift exchange. The production of elaborately decorated weapons, jewellery and ceremonial objects required technical skills and artistic sensibilities that demonstrated the high level of cultural achievement reached during this period. The Kassite approach to international trade emphasized the development of long-term relationships rather than short-term profit maximization. Royal merchants, operating under official protection and following standardized procedures, established trading posts in distant locations that served as permanent bases for commercial operations. These facilities, staffed by Mesopotamian personnel and protected by diplomatic agreements, provided secure environments for conducting business while facilitating the cultural exchange that enriched Mesopotamian civilization. The agricultural innovations implemented during the Kassite period increased food production while supporting the population growth that characterized Late Bronze Age Mesopotamia. The expansion of irrigation systems, accomplished through royal investment and coordinated planning, brought previously marginal lands under cultivation while improving the productivity of existing agricultural areas. The introduction of new crops, including varieties adapted from other regions through international contacts, diversified agricultural production and reduced the risks associated with crop failures. The Kassite period witnessed significant developments in metallurgical technology that enhanced both military capabilities and craft production. The improvement of bronze-working techniques, including the development of new alloys and casting methods, produced weapons and tools of superior quality and durability. The establishment of specialized metalworking centers, supplied with raw materials through international trade networks, created concentrations of technical expertise that advanced Mesopotamian metallurgical capabilities beyond previous achievements. The international connections that the Kassites maintained facilitated the exchange of technical knowledge and artistic styles that enriched Mesopotamian culture while preserving its distinctive characteristics. Craftsmen from distant regions, invited to work in Kassite workshops, introduced new techniques and decorative motifs that were adapted to local preferences and integrated into traditional Mesopotamian artistic traditions. This cultural synthesis created distinctive artistic styles that reflected both international influences and indigenous Mesopotamian creativity. The administrative records from the Kassite period, preserved in archives at sites throughout the kingdom, provide detailed information about the economic and social structures that supported this remarkable civilization. These documents reveal sophisticated systems for managing agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and commercial activities that enable the Kassites to maintain their position as a major power for over 4 centuries. The complexity and detail of these records demonstrate the advanced administrative capabilities that the Kassites had developed while adapting Mesopotamian bureaucratic traditions to their own needs and circumstances. The gradual decline of Kassite power in Babylonia and the fragmentation of late Bronze Age international systems created opportunities for ambitious rulers to forge new imperial structures. The kingdom of Assyria, centered in the northern Mesopotamian city of Ashur, had maintained its independence throughout the Kassite period, while developing military capabilities and administrative expertise that would prove crucial for the next phase of Mesopotamian history. The emergence of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, around 911 BCE, represented not merely another dynastic change, but a fundamental transformation in the scale and sophistication of imperial organization that would create the largest and most efficiently administered empire the ancient Near East had yet witnessed. The foundations of Neo-Assyrian military supremacy rested on revolutionary innovations in weaponry, tactics, and military organization that transformed the nature of ancient warfare. The systematic adoption of iron weapons, beginning in the 10th century BCE, provided Assyrian forces with decisive advantages over enemies still relying primarily on bronze armaments. Iron weapons possessed superior hardness and durability compared to bronze, while the relative abundance of iron ore compared to the copper and tin required for bronze production enabled the Assyrians to equip larger armies with high-quality weapons. The transition to iron technology required the development of new metallurgical techniques, including improved furnace designs and heat treatment methods that Assyrian craftsmen mastered through systematic experimentation and knowledge acquired from neighbouring peoples. The Assyrian military machine that emerged under Adad-nirari II and reached full development under his successors represented the world's first truly professional army. Unlike the seasonal levies and part-time militias that had characterized earlier Mesopotamian warfare, the Assyrian military consisted of full-time soldiers who received regular pay, standardized equipment, and systematic training in specialized combat techniques. The professional officer corps, drawn from the Assyrian nobility and educated in military academies, possessed knowledge of siege warfare, logistics, and battlefield tactics that exceeded anything previously seen in the ancient world. The organizational structure of the Assyrian army reflected careful attention to both tactical effectiveness and administrative efficiency. Infantry units, typically consisting of 1,000 men commanded by a professional officer, were organized into larger formations that could operate independently or in coordination with other units depending on tactical requirements. Archers, equipped with composite bows constructed from wood, horn, and sinew, provided long-range firepower that could penetrate enemy armor at distances exceeding 200 meters. Heavy infantry, protected by iron-scale armor and carrying iron-tipped spears and swords, formed the backbone of Assyrian battle formations and proved capable of sustained combat in the most demanding conditions. The development of Assyrian siege warfare capabilities revolutionized the conduct of military operations throughout the ancient Near East. Traditional city fortifications, designed to withstand attacks by infantry and archers, proved inadequate against the sophisticated siege engines and systematic assault techniques employed by Assyrian forces. The Assyrians perfected the use of battering rams, massive wooden devices reinforced with iron fittings and operated by teams of soldiers working in coordinated shifts. These engines, mounted on wheeled platforms and protected by leather-covered wooden frames, could breach gates and wall sections that had previously been considered impregnable. The systematic use of siege towers, mobile structures that could be moved against enemy fortifications to provide elevated platforms for archers and assault troops, demonstrated the advanced engineering capabilities available to Assyrian commanders. These towers, constructed from timber and reinforced with metal fittings, stood up to 20 meters in height and could accommodate dozens of soldiers. The coordination required to move these massive structures into position while under enemy fire demanded sophisticated logistical planning and battlefield communication systems that reflected the professional competence of Assyrian military organization. Assyrian siege tactics incorporated psychological warfare elements that proved as effective as physical assault techniques. The deliberate use of terror, including the public execution of captured defenders and the display of severed heads and flayed skins, created psychological pressure that often induced enemy surrender without prolonged resistance. The Assyrians understood that the reputation for ruthless treatment of those who resisted could reduce the costs and casualties associated with siege warfare by encouraging rapid capitulation. This calculated use of terror, while brutal by modern standards, represented a rational military strategy that minimized Assyrian losses while maximizing the psychological impact of their campaigns. The intelligence networks that supported Assyrian military operations provided commanders with detailed information about enemy capabilities, intentions, and vulnerabilities that enabled effective strategic planning. Professional spies, operating under diplomatic cover or disguised as merchants, gathered information about fortifications, troop movements, and political conditions in target territories. This intelligence, combined with systematic reconnaissance conducted by advanced units, enabled Assyrian commanders to plan campaigns with unprecedented precision and adapt their tactics to specific local conditions. The reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, beginning in 745 BCE, marked the transformation of Assyrian military capabilities into a systematic program of territorial expansion that would create the largest empire in ancient Near Eastern history to that point. His military reforms, including the standardization of equipment and training procedures, created army units that could operate effectively across diverse geographic and climatic conditions. The establishment of permanent military bases in conquered territories provided staging areas for further expansion while ensuring the security of existing imperial holdings. Tiglath-Pileser's campaigns against the Aramean kingdoms of Syria demonstrated the effectiveness of Assyrian military innovations against sophisticated opponents. The siege of Damascus, lasting over 2 years, showcased the Assyrians' ability to maintain complex military operations across extended periods while coordinating supply lines that stretched across hundreds of kilometers. The systematic reduction of Syrian fortifications, accomplished through the coordinated use of siege engines and assault tactics, eliminated a major source of resistance to Assyrian expansion while providing access to the lucrative trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with the Mediterranean coast. The conquest of the Levantine city-states required the Assyrians to develop new approaches to governing diverse populations with distinct cultural traditions and economic systems. The deportation policies implemented by Tiglath-Pileser and his successors represented a systematic attempt to prevent rebellion by disrupting local social structures and creating mixed populations that lack the cohesion necessary for organized resistance. skilled craftsmen and administrators were relocated to Assyrian heartland territories where their expertise could contribute to imperial development, while agricultural populations were resettled in regions where they could maintain productivity under Assyrian supervision. The administrative innovations that enabled effective governance of this vast empire represented achievements in bureaucratic organization that would influence imperial administration for centuries. The provincial system established by Tiglath-Pileser divided conquered territories into manageable administrative units, governed by appointed officials responsible directly to the royal court. These provinces, typically centered on major cities and encompassing surrounding agricultural territories, were sized to enable effective supervision while maintaining economic viability. Provincial governors, drawn from the Assyrian nobility and supported by professional administrative staffs, possessed both civilian and military authority that enabled rapid response to local challenges. The standardization of administrative procedures throughout the empire facilitated efficient governance while reducing the costs associated with maintaining control over diverse populations. Uniform taxation systems based on standardized assessments of agricultural productivity and commercial activity provided predictable revenue streams that supported imperial military forces and administrative apparatus. The use of Aramaic as the empire's administrative language, written in alphabetic script rather than cuneiform, simplified record-keeping and communication, while enabling the rapid training of scribal personnel. The intelligence networks that supported imperial administration provided central authorities with detailed information about conditions throughout the empire that enabled effective policy implementation and early warning of potential problems. Professional intelligence officers, stationed in major cities and reporting directly to the royal court, monitored local political developments, economic conditions, and social tensions that might threaten imperial stability. This information, transmitted through rapid communication systems that employed relay stations and mounted messengers, enabled central authorities to respond quickly to emerging challenges. The reign of Sargon II, beginning in 722 BCE, witnessed the expansion of Assyrian control into new geographic regions that required adaptations in military tactics and administrative procedures. His campaigns against the kingdom of Urartu, located in the mountainous regions of eastern Anatolia, demonstrated Assyrian ability to conduct effective military operations in difficult terrain against opponents who possessed sophisticated military capabilities. The systematic reduction of Urartian fortifications, accomplished through the coordinated use of siege engines and mountain warfare tactics, eliminated a major threat to Assyrian northern territories while providing access to mineral resources and trade routes. The conquest of Cyprus under Sargon's direction represented the first successful Assyrian naval operation and demonstrated the empire's ability to project military power across maritime distances. The development of naval capabilities, including the construction of warships and the training of naval personnel, required the Assyrians to master new technologies and tactical approaches that differed significantly from their traditional land-based military expertise. The successful integration of naval operations with land-based campaigns created new strategic possibilities that enhanced Assyrian military effectiveness. Sargon's construction of a new capital city at Dur-Sharrukin demonstrated the wealth and organizational capabilities that the empire had accumulated through successful territorial expansion. The city, covering over 300 hectares and containing elaborate palace complexes, administrative buildings, and residential quarters, required the coordinated labour of thousands of workers over multiple years. The architectural innovations incorporated into the city's design, including improved drainage systems, sophisticated defensive works, and monumental decorative elements, reflected the cultural achievements that had emerged from the synthesis of diverse imperial traditions. The reign of Ashurbanipal, spanning from 669 to 627 BCE, marked the zenith of Assyrian imperial power and witnessed remarkable achievements in both military conquest and cultural development. His campaigns against Egypt, culminating in the capture of Thebes in 663 BCE, extended Assyrian control to its maximum geographic extent and demonstrated the empire's ability to conduct effective military operations across vast distances. The systematic organisation of these campaigns, including the coordination of supply lines that stretched across the entire length of the Fertile Crescent, reflected the sophisticated logistical capabilities that had been developed through centuries of military experience. The Library of Ashurbanipal, established in the royal palace at Nineveh, represented one of the most remarkable cultural achievements of the ancient world. This collection, containing over 30,000 cuneiform tablets gathered from libraries and archives throughout the empire, preserved the literary and scholarly heritage of Mesopotamian civilization while making it accessible to contemporary scholars and administrators. The systematic organisation of the library, with tablets catalogued according to subject matter and cross-referenced through sophisticated indexing systems, demonstrated the advanced intellectual capabilities that had emerged within Assyrian scholarly circles. The library's collection included literary works spanning the entire history of Mesopotamian civilization, from Sumerian hymns and myths to contemporary Assyrian historical records. The preservation of multiple versions of important texts, including various recensions of the Epic of Gilgamesh, enabled scholars to conduct comparative studies that advanced understanding of textual transmission and literary development. The library also contained extensive collections of technical works, including mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, medical texts, and legal documents that provided practical knowledge for imperial administration. The scholarly activities conducted within the library demonstrated the sophisticated intellectual culture that had developed within the Assyrian court. Professional scribes, trained in multiple languages and writing systems, produced new editions of classical texts while creating original works that address contemporary concerns. The development of new scholarly methods, including systematic approaches to textual criticism and historical analysis, reflected the advanced educational systems that had been established to support imperial administration. The artistic achievements of the Neo-Assyrian period, exemplified by the palace reliefs and sculptural programs created for royal residences, demonstrated the cultural sophistication that had emerged from the synthesis of diverse imperial traditions. The palace reliefs at Nineveh, covering thousands of square meters of wall surface, depicted royal hunting scenes, military campaigns, and religious ceremonies with unprecedented detail and artistic sophistication. These works, carved from limestone slabs and originally painted in bright colours, served both decorative and propagandistic functions by celebrating royal achievements while demonstrating the empire's cultural superiority. The technical innovations employed in creating these artistic works reflected the advanced craft capabilities that had been developed within imperial workshops. The use of standardized carving techniques, combined with sophisticated compositional principles, enabled teams of craftsmen to create unified artistic programs that maintained consistent quality across vast decorative schemes. The integration of textual elements with visual imagery, including cuneiform inscriptions that provided historical context for depicted scenes, demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of visual communication that had been achieved by Assyrian artists. The palace architecture that housed these artistic programs reflected the monumental scale and sophisticated planning that characterized Assyrian imperial construction. The palace at Nineveh, covering over 200 hectares and containing dozens of courtyards and hundreds of rooms, required the coordinated efforts of thousands of workers over multiple decades. The building's sophisticated infrastructure, including drainage systems, water supply networks, and ventilation arrangements, demonstrated the advanced engineering capabilities that had been developed to support imperial administration. The economic systems that supported this vast imperial apparatus represented achievements in administrative organisation that enabled effective resource management across diverse geographic regions. The tribute system, which required subject territories to provide regular payments in goods and services, created revenue streams that supported imperial military forces and administrative personnel. The systematic assessment of tribute obligations, based on detailed surveys of agricultural productivity and commercial activity, ensured that imperial demands remained within the economic capabilities of subject populations while maximising revenue generation. The trade networks that connected the empire with distant regions provided access to luxury goods and raw materials that enhanced imperial wealth while demonstrating Assyrian power to foreign observers. Royal merchants, operating under official protection and following standardized procedures, established trading relationships that extended from the Iranian plateau to the Mediterranean coast. These commercial activities, supported by diplomatic agreements and military guarantees, generated substantial revenues while facilitating the cultural exchange that enriched Assyrian civilization. The manufacturing systems that produced goods for both imperial consumption and international trade demonstrated the sophisticated craft capabilities that had been developed within Assyrian territories. Royal workshops, established in major cities and staffed by skilled craftsmen, produced luxury goods that met the demanding standards of imperial courts while maintaining the quality necessary for diplomatic gift exchange. The standardization of production techniques, combined with quality control measures enforced by professional supervisors, created manufacturing capabilities that exceeded anything previously achieved in the ancient world. The collapse of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in 609 BCE created a power vacuum that would be filled by one of the most spectacular and culturally significant dynasties in Mesopotamian history. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, established by Nabopolassar in 626 BCE, represented not merely a political revival but a conscious attempt to restore Babylonian glory, while incorporating the administrative innovations and international connections that had characterized the preceding Assyrian period. Under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar II, who ascended to the throne in 605 BCE, this renewed Babylonian state would achieve unprecedented architectural magnificence, military success, and cultural achievement that would make Babylon synonymous with imperial grandeur throughout the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar's architectural vision for Babylon reflected both his political ambitions and his understanding of monumental construction as a tool of imperial legitimacy. The reconstruction of the city began almost immediately upon his accession and continued throughout his 43-year reign, transforming Babylon into a metropolis that dwarfed all previous Mesopotamian urban centres. The city's new layout, covering approximately 850 hectares within its outer walls, incorporated sophisticated urban planning principles that balanced ceremonial magnificence with practical functionality. The famous double-wall system, consisting of an outer wall 7 metres thick and an inner wall 6.5 metres thick, created a defensive perimeter that extended for over 18 kilometres and included numerous towers positioned at regular intervals to provide overlapping fields of fire. The Ishtar Gate, perhaps the most celebrated architectural achievement of the Neo-Babylonian period, demonstrated the sophisticated artistic and engineering capabilities that had been developed under royal patronage. This massive structure, standing approximately 15 metres high and constructed from brilliant blue glazed bricks, served as the northern entrance to the inner city and the starting point for the great processional way that led to the city's ceremonial centre. The gate's surface decoration consisted of over 575 relief figures depicting dragons, bulls and lions executed in glazed brick technique that required extraordinary technical skill and artistic sophistication. The dragons, representing Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, were rendered in yellow and brown glazes against the blue background, while the bulls of Adad and lions of Ishtar were depicted in white and yellow glazes that created a stunning polychromatic effect. The construction of the Ishtar Gate required the coordination of numerous specialized craftsmen working with materials and techniques that push the boundaries of contemporary technology. The glazed bricks, each individually moulded and fired, were produced in workshops that had mastered the complex chemistry of ceramic glazes while maintaining the precise colour standards necessary for the gate's decorative programme. The relief figures, carved in low relief before glazing, required skilled artisans capable of creating consistent iconographic representations across hundreds of individual bricks. The assembly of these elements into the final structure demanded sophisticated engineering knowledge to ensure structural stability while maintaining the precise alignment necessary for the decorative programme's visual impact. The processional way, extending from the Ishtar Gate, the city's ceremonial centre, represented one of the most ambitious urban planning projects undertaken in the ancient world. This avenue, approximately 20 metres wide and extending for over 600 metres, was paved with limestone slabs and bordered by walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting 120 striding lions. The lions, rendered in yellow and red glazes against blue backgrounds, created a powerful visual experience that reinforced the ceremonial significance of the route, while demonstrating the empire's artistic capabilities. The street's construction required the excavation and preparation of foundations, the installation of sophisticated drainage systems to prevent water damage, and the careful positioning of decorative elements according to precise architectural specifications. The reconstruction of Babylon's ziggurat, known as Etemenanki and later famous as the Biblical Tower of Babel, represented Nebuchadnezzar's most ambitious architectural undertaking. This massive structure, rising approximately 90 metres above the surrounding plain, consisted of 7 terraced levels constructed from millions of mud bricks faced with fired brick. The ziggurat's base measured 91 metres on each side, making it one of the largest religious structures ever constructed in Mesopotamia. The building's interior contained a complex system of chambers, stairways and ramps that provided access to the temple at its summit, while incorporating storage facilities and administrative offices necessary for the religious complex's operation. The engineering challenges posed by the ziggurat's construction required innovations in structural design and construction techniques that demonstrated the advanced technical capabilities available to Nebuchadnezzar's builders. The massive weight of the upper levels necessitated the development of sophisticated foundation systems that distributed loads evenly across the underlying soil. The structure's drainage systems, incorporating both surface channels and internal conduits, prevented water damage while maintaining structural integrity across the building's enormous mass. The coordination of materials and labour required for the project's completion demanded administrative capabilities that reflected the sophisticated bureaucratic systems that had been developed to support imperial construction programs. The palace complex constructed by Nebuchadnezzar, adjacent to the processional way, demonstrated the integration of ceremonial magnificence with practical administrative functionality that characterized Neo-Babylonian royal architecture. The southern palace, covering approximately 5 hectares and containing over 600 rooms, served as both the royal residence and the empire's administrative centre. The building's throne room, measuring 52 metres in length and 17 metres in width, provided a suitably impressive setting for royal audiences while incorporating acoustic design features that enhanced the ceremonial impact of royal pronouncements. The palace's decorative programme, executed in glazed brick reliefs and painted plaster, depicted royal hunting scenes, religious ceremonies, and tribute processions that celebrated imperial achievements while reinforcing the divine nature of royal authority. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, described by classical authors as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, represented the pinnacle of Neo-Babylonian horticultural and engineering achievement. These terraced gardens, constructed within the palace complex, employed sophisticated irrigation systems that lifted water from the Euphrates River to supply plants growing at various elevations above ground level. The garden's design incorporated architectural elements that created microclimates suitable for diverse plant species, including trees and flowering plants imported from throughout the empire's territories. The engineering systems that supported the gardens, including waterproof terraces, drainage networks, and mechanical lifting devices, demonstrated the advanced technical knowledge that had been developed to support royal luxury while creating unprecedented landscape architecture. Nebuchadnezzar's military campaigns extended Neo-Babylonian control throughout the Levant while demonstrating the empire's ability to conduct complex military operations across vast distances. The siege of Jerusalem, beginning in 597 BCE and culminating in the city's destruction in 586 BCE, represented one of the most significant military achievements of the Neo-Babylonian period, while having profound consequences for the development of Jewish religious and cultural identity. The systematic reduction of Jerusalem's fortifications, accomplished through the coordinated use of siege engines and blockade tactics, demonstrated the effectiveness of Neo-Babylonian military capabilities against sophisticated urban defences. The deportation of Jewish populations following Jerusalem's conquest represented a systematic implementation of population transfer policies that had been developed during the Assyrian period, but refined under Neo-Babylonian administration. The removal of approximately 10,000 skilled craftsmen, administrators, and religious leaders to Babylon served multiple purposes. It eliminated potential sources of rebellion in conquered territories, while providing the empire with valuable human resources for construction projects and administrative positions. The deportees were settled in established communities near Babylon, where they could maintain their cultural identity while contributing to imperial development programs. The Babylonian exile, as this deportation came to be known, had profound impacts on Jewish religious development that extended far beyond its immediate political consequences. The experience of displacement from their homeland forced Jewish communities to develop new forms of religious practice that could function without the temple in Jerusalem. The emphasis on textual study, communal worship, and portable religious practices that emerged during this period laid the foundations for rabbinic Judaism while preserving Jewish cultural identity under foreign rule. The literary works produced during the exile, including portions of the Hebrew Bible, reflected both the trauma of displacement and the adaptation to new circumstances that characterized Jewish experience under Neo-Babylonian rule. The integration of deported populations into Neo-Babylonian society demonstrated the empire's sophisticated approach to managing diverse ethnic and cultural groups within its territories. Jewish communities in Babylon maintained their religious practices while participating in commercial and administrative activities that contributed to imperial prosperity. Some individuals achieved positions of significant responsibility within the imperial bureaucracy, demonstrating the meritocratic elements that characterized Neo-Babylonian administration. The preservation of Jewish cultural identity within the broader imperial framework created a model for cultural pluralism that would influence subsequent imperial systems. The scientific and mathematical achievements of the Neo-Babylonian period represented the culmination of millennia of Mesopotamian intellectual development, while incorporating knowledge acquired through international contacts. Babylonian astronomers, working in temple complexes and royal observatories, developed systematic methods for recording and analysing celestial phenomena that enabled accurate prediction of astronomical events. The Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, compiled during this period, contained detailed observations of planetary movements that demonstrated the sophisticated mathematical techniques employed by Babylonian astronomers. The development of mathematical astronomy during the Neo-Babylonian period required innovations in numerical methods and geometric analysis that advanced mathematical knowledge throughout the ancient world. Babylonian mathematicians developed sophisticated techniques for calculating planetary positions, eclipse predictions, and calendar correlations that required the manipulation of large numbers and complex geometric relationships. The sexagesimal number system, inherited from earlier Mesopotamian traditions, provided the numerical framework for these calculations while enabling the development of trigonometric concepts that would influence mathematical development for centuries. The astronomical observations conducted during this period produced detailed records of celestial phenomena that provided the empirical foundation for theoretical developments in mathematical astronomy. The systematic recording of lunar eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and stellar positions created databases that enabled astronomers to identify recurring patterns and develop predictive models. These observations, recorded on cuneiform tablets and preserved in temple archives, represented the world's first systematic approach to empirical scientific investigation. The calendar systems developed by Neo-Babylonian astronomers addressed the practical needs of agricultural and religious scheduling while incorporating sophisticated mathematical principles. The lunar calendar, based on careful observation of lunar phases, required periodic adjustments to maintain synchronization with the solar year. The development of intercalation rules, determining when additional months should be added to the calendar, required mathematical analysis of astronomical cycles that demonstrated the advanced computational capabilities available to Babylonian scholars. The mathematical innovations of the Neo-Babylonian period extended beyond astronomical applications to include developments in algebra, geometry, and numerical analysis that influenced mathematical traditions throughout the ancient world. Babylonian mathematicians developed systematic methods for solving quadratic equations, calculating areas and volumes of geometric figures, and manipulating fractional quantities that required sophisticated understanding of mathematical relationships. The mathematical tablets from this period reveal problem-solving techniques and computational methods that demonstrate the high level of mathematical sophistication achieved by Babylonian scholars. The religious developments that occurred under Neo-Babylonian rule reflected both the restoration of traditional Mesopotamian religious practices and innovations that addressed contemporary political and cultural circumstances. The elevation of Marduk to supreme position within the Babylonian pantheon required theological arguments that integrated traditional Mesopotamian religious concepts with political realities of imperial rule. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that celebrated Marduk's victory over primordial chaos, provided mythological justification for Babylonian political supremacy while preserving essential elements of earlier Mesopotamian religious traditions. The annual Akitu festival, celebrating the new year and Marduk's supremacy, represented the most significant religious ceremony of the Neo-Babylonian period and demonstrated the integration of religious observance with political legitimacy. This 11-day festival, held during the spring equinox, involved elaborate processions, ritual dramas, and ceremonial activities that reinforced the divine nature of royal authority while celebrating Babylonian cultural achievements. The festival's ceremonial program, including the ritual humiliation and restoration of the king, reflected sophisticated understanding of religious psychology while providing opportunities for popular participation in imperial celebrations. The restoration of temple complexes throughout the empire provided focal points for religious observance, while demonstrating royal commitment to traditional religious practices. The reconstruction of major temples, including the Asagila complex dedicated to Marduk, required enormous investments of resources and skilled labour that demonstrated the empire's prosperity while creating impressive architectural settings for religious ceremonies. The temple complexes served multiple functions, including religious worship, economic administration, and scholarly activity, that made them essential components of imperial administration. The development of new religious literature during this period reflected the synthesis of traditional Mesopotamian religious concepts with contemporary political and cultural concerns. Religious texts composed during the Neo-Babylonian period addressed questions of divine justice, imperial legitimacy, and cultural identity that reflected the complex circumstances of imperial rule over diverse populations. The preservation and transmission of earlier religious literature, combined with the creation of new works, demonstrated the sophisticated literary culture that had emerged within temple and palace scriptoriums. The cultural and religious innovations that had flourished under Neo-Babylonian rule created a sophisticated urban civilization that would prove remarkably adaptable to the dramatic political changes that swept across the ancient Near East in the 6th century BCE. The Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE, accomplished by Cyrus the Great without the prolonged siege warfare that had characterized previous imperial transitions, marked the beginning of a new era in Mesopotamian history that would fundamentally transform the region's political organization while preserving essential elements of its cultural heritage. Cyrus's approach to conquering Babylon demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of Mesopotamian political culture that enabled him to achieve victory through diplomatic maneuvering rather than purely military force. The Persian king's propaganda campaign, preserved in the famous Cyrus Cylinder, portrayed his conquest as a liberation from the religious innovations and administrative failures of Nabonidus, the last Neo-Babylonian ruler. By presenting himself as a restorer of traditional Mesopotamian religious practices and a protector of local customs, Cyrus secured the support of Babylon's powerful priesthood while undermining popular support for the existing dynasty. This strategy proved remarkably effective, as the city's gates were opened to Persian forces by internal supporters who viewed Cyrus as a legitimate ruler rather than a foreign conqueror. The administrative integration of Mesopotamia into the expanding Achaemenid Persian Empire required the development of new governmental structures that could accommodate the region's sophisticated bureaucratic traditions while maintaining imperial unity across vast territories. The satrap system, implemented by Cyrus and refined by his successors, divided the empire into large administrative provinces governed by appointed officials who possessed both civilian and military authority. The satrapy of Babylonia, encompassing the core territories of ancient Mesopotamia, became one of the empire's most important and prosperous provinces, contributing substantial revenues to the imperial treasury while serving as a crucial link between the Persian heartland and the empire's western territories. The Persian approach to governing Mesopotamia demonstrated remarkable cultural sensitivity that preserved local traditions while integrating the region into the broader imperial framework. Unlike previous conquerors who had typically imposed their own administrative systems and cultural practices, the Persians maintained existing Mesopotamian governmental structures while adapting them to serve imperial purposes. Local officials who demonstrated competence and loyalty were retained in their positions, while new Persian administrators were gradually introduced to oversee strategic functions and ensure imperial control. This gradual transition minimized disruption to established administrative procedures while creating hybrid governmental systems that combined Persian imperial oversight with Mesopotamian administrative expertise. The religious policies implemented under Persian rule reflected the empire's commitment to cultural tolerance and administrative pragmatism. The restoration of traditional Mesopotamian religious practices, including the proper observance of festivals and the maintenance of temple complexes, demonstrated Persian respect for local customs while securing the loyalty of influential religious establishments. The Persian kings, beginning with Cyrus, assumed the traditional Mesopotamian royal role of temple patron and religious protector, participating in ceremonial activities and providing financial support for religious institutions. This approach enabled the Persians to maintain legitimacy within Mesopotamian society, while preserving the religious frameworks that had provided social cohesion for millennia. The economic transformation that occurred under Persian rule reflected the integration of Mesopotamian production and trade systems into the empire's vast commercial networks. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency across the empire facilitated long-distance commerce while reducing transaction costs for merchants operating across cultural boundaries. The introduction of coined money, beginning with the gold darics and silver sigloi issued by Persian mints, provided standardized media of exchange that simplified commercial transactions while enabling more sophisticated credit and banking systems. Mesopotamian merchants operating within these new economic frameworks expanded their commercial activities to include territories that had previously been accessible only through complex diplomatic arrangements. The agricultural policies implemented by Persian administrators enhanced food production while supporting population growth in urban centres. The expansion of irrigation systems, accomplished through imperial investment and coordinated planning, brought previously marginal lands under cultivation while improving the productivity of existing agricultural areas. The introduction of new crops, including varieties adapted from other regions of the empire, diversified agricultural production and reduced the risks associated with crop failures. The systematic organisation of agricultural territories, with carefully planned field systems and water distribution networks, maximise productivity while maintaining the environmental sustainability that had enabled Mesopotamian agriculture to flourish for millennia. The craft production systems that developed under Persian rule achieved new levels of sophistication through the integration of Mesopotamian technical traditions with innovations borrowed from other parts of the empire. Royal workshops, established in major cities and staffed by skilled craftsmen from diverse cultural backgrounds, produced luxury goods that combined traditional Mesopotamian artistic themes with Persian imperial iconography. The development of new artistic styles, incorporating elements from Persian, Mesopotamian, and other imperial traditions, created distinctive cultural expressions that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Persian imperial society while preserving essential elements of local artistic heritage. The architectural achievements of the Persian period in Mesopotamia demonstrated the successful synthesis of imperial grandeur with local building traditions. The reconstruction of major temple complexes, undertaken with royal patronage and employing the finest craftsmen available, created religious buildings that maintained traditional Mesopotamian architectural principles while incorporating Persian decorative elements. The use of new construction techniques, including improved stoneworking methods and more sophisticated structural engineering, enabled the creation of buildings that surpassed previous architectural achievements while preserving the essential religious and ceremonial functions that had characterized Mesopotamian sacred architecture. The intellectual developments that occurred under Persian rule reflected the empire's commitment to preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge across diverse populations. The establishment of libraries and scriptoriums in major cities created centres for scholarly activity that maintained Mesopotamian literary traditions, while facilitating cultural exchange with other parts of the empire. Scribes trained in multiple languages and writing systems produced new editions of classical texts while creating original works that addressed contemporary concerns. The development of new scholarly methods, including systematic approaches to historical analysis and comparative studies, reflected the advanced educational systems that had been established to support imperial administration. The legal systems that evolved under Persian rule demonstrated the integration of Mesopotamian legal traditions with imperial administrative requirements. The preservation of local legal customs, combined with the introduction of Persian imperial law for matters affecting imperial interests, created hybrid legal systems that provided familiar frameworks for local disputes while ensuring imperial control over strategic issues. The training of legal professionals in both local and imperial legal traditions enabled the development of sophisticated jurisprudential systems that could address the complex legal issues arising from the interaction of diverse cultural and legal traditions within the imperial framework. The military organization that supported Persian rule in Mesopotamia reflected the empire's approach to integrating local military traditions with imperial strategic requirements. Mesopotamian military units, equipped and trained according to Persian standards, but maintaining elements of local military culture, served alongside Persian forces in campaigns throughout the empire. The development of combined arms tactics, incorporating Mesopotamian siege warfare expertise with Persian cavalry and archery techniques, created military capabilities that proved highly effective against diverse opponents. The establishment of military colonies in strategic locations provided security for trade routes and administrative centres, while creating communities that blended Persian and Mesopotamian military traditions. The transformation of Mesopotamian society under Persian rule created new social structures that reflected the empire's multicultural character, while preserving essential elements of traditional Mesopotamian social organisation. The Persian nobility, settling in major Mesopotamian cities, intermarried with local elite families and adopted aspects of Mesopotamian culture while maintaining their Persian identity. This cultural synthesis created new social classes that combined Persian political authority with Mesopotamian economic expertise and cultural knowledge. The development of new educational institutions designed to train administrators capable of operating effectively within this multicultural environment produced professional classes that could serve imperial needs while maintaining connections to local communities. The commercial networks that connected Mesopotamia with the distant regions of the Persian Empire facilitated unprecedented levels of cultural and economic exchange. Mesopotamian merchants, operating under imperial protection and following standardized commercial procedures, established trading relationships that extended from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean coast. These commercial activities, supported by imperial infrastructure including roads, bridges and communication systems, generated substantial wealth while facilitating the exchange of ideas, technologies and cultural practices that enriched Mesopotamian civilization. The artistic and cultural developments that emerged from this commercial and cultural exchange created new forms of artistic expression that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Persian imperial society. Mesopotamian artists, working with materials and techniques acquired through imperial trade networks, produced works that incorporated stylistic elements from throughout the empire while maintaining distinctively Mesopotamian thematic content. The development of new decorative techniques, including the use of precious metals and exotic materials in architectural decoration, created artistic works that demonstrated the wealth and cultural sophistication that had emerged from imperial integration. The arrival of Alexander the Great in Mesopotamia in 331 BCE marked the beginning of another fundamental transformation in the region's political and cultural development. The Macedonian conquest of the Persian Empire, accomplished through a series of brilliant military campaigns that demonstrated Alexander's tactical genius and strategic vision, created opportunities for new forms of cultural synthesis that would profoundly influence Mesopotamian civilization. Alexander's approach to governing conquered territories, which combined Macedonian military efficiency with respect for local traditions and Persian administrative practices, created governmental frameworks that preserved essential elements of established systems while introducing new political concepts and administrative techniques. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought near the ancient Assyrian capital of Nineveh, demonstrated the military innovations that enabled Alexander's forces to defeat the massive Persian army, despite being significantly outnumbered. The Macedonian phalanx, consisting of heavily armed infantry fighting in close formation with long spears called sarissas, provided the tactical foundation for Alexander's victory through its superior discipline and coordinated maneuvering capabilities. The integration of cavalry units, siege engines, and specialized troops created combined arms capabilities that proved devastatingly effective against Persian forces that had been organized according to traditional imperial military principles. Alexander's treatment of Babylon following his victory reflected his sophisticated understanding of Mesopotamian political culture and his commitment to maintaining continuity with established governmental traditions. The Macedonian king's ceremonial entry into the city, conducted according to traditional Mesopotamian royal protocols, demonstrated his respect for local customs while establishing his legitimacy as the rightful successor to Persian imperial authority. The preservation of existing administrative structures, combined with the introduction of Macedonian military commanders and Greek administrative personnel, created hybrid governmental systems that maintained operational efficiency while ensuring Macedonian control over strategic functions. The cultural policies implemented under Alexander's rule reflected his vision of creating a unified empire that would combine the best elements of Greek, Persian, and local traditions. The encouragement of intermarriage between Macedonian soldiers and local women, demonstrated by Alexander's own marriage to Roxana and his mass wedding ceremony at Susa, created new social bonds that transcended ethnic and cultural boundaries. The establishment of Greek-style educational institutions alongside traditional Mesopotamian schools created opportunities for cultural exchange that enriched both Greek and Mesopotamian intellectual traditions, while producing new generations of administrators capable of operating effectively within the multicultural imperial framework. The death of Alexander in Babylon in 323 BCE created a succession crisis that would ultimately result in the division of his empire among his generals and the establishment of new Hellenistic kingdoms throughout the former Persian territories. The Wars of the Diadochi, as these succession conflicts came to be known, demonstrated the military and political challenges inherent in maintaining unified control over the vast territories that Alexander had conquered. The eventual emergence of the Seleucid Empire, established by Seleucus I Nicata, created a new political framework that would govern Mesopotamia for nearly 2 centuries while preserving many elements of the governmental and cultural systems that had developed under Persian rule. The Seleucid approach to governing Mesopotamia reflected their understanding of the region's strategic importance and cultural significance within their broader imperial framework. The establishment of new Greek cities, including Seleucia on the Tigris, created centres of Hellenistic culture that served as administrative capitals while maintaining connections to traditional Mesopotamian urban centres. These new cities, designed according to Greek urban planning principles but adapted to local environmental conditions, demonstrated the synthesis of Greek and Mesopotamian architectural and urban design traditions that characterized the Hellenistic period. The economic policies implemented by the Seleucid rulers enhanced Mesopotamian prosperity, while integrating the region into the broader economic networks of the Hellenistic world. The standardization of currency systems, based on Greek monetary standards but incorporating local design elements, facilitated commercial transactions while maintaining connections to established Mesopotamian commercial practices. The development of new trade routes connecting Mesopotamian cities with Greek commercial centres in the eastern Mediterranean created opportunities for economic growth while facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices that enrich both Greek and Mesopotamian civilizations. The religious and cultural developments that occurred under Seleucid rule reflected the complex interactions between Greek, Persian, and Mesopotamian traditions that characterized the Hellenistic period. The preservation of traditional Mesopotamian religious practices, combined with the introduction of Greek religious concepts and Persian imperial traditions, created syncretic religious systems that incorporated elements from multiple cultural traditions. The development of new philosophical schools, combining Greek rational inquiry with Mesopotamian wisdom traditions, produced intellectual frameworks that addressed contemporary concerns while preserving essential elements of ancient cultural heritage. The military innovations that emerged during the Seleucid period reflected the integration of Macedonian tactical principles with Persian and Mesopotamian military traditions. the development of new siege warfare techniques, combining Greek engineering expertise with Mesopotamian architectural knowledge, created military capabilities that proved highly effective against diverse opponents. The establishment of military colonies throughout the empire provided security for trade routes and administrative centres, while creating communities that blended Greek, Persian and Mesopotamian military traditions. The gradual decline of Seleucid power in Mesopotamia during the 2nd century BCE created opportunities for new political forces to assert control over the region. The rise of the Parthian Empire, established by nomadic peoples from the Iranian plateau, would ultimately result in the end of Hellenistic rule in Mesopotamia and the beginning of a new phase in the region's political and cultural development. The Parthian conquest of Mesopotamia in 141 BCE marked the end of nearly 4 centuries of Greek political influence, while preserving many elements of the cultural synthesis that had emerged during the Hellenistic period. The Parthian conquest of Mesopotamia in 141 BCE marked the beginning of the final phase of ancient Mesopotamian civilization, as the region became a contested frontier province between 2 great empires locked in perpetual struggle. The Parthian Empire, established by the Arsacid dynasty and centred in the Iranian plateau, brought new forms of political organisation and cultural expression to Mesopotamia, while simultaneously preserving certain elements of the Hellenistic administrative systems they had inherited from the Seleucids. This transition occurred not through sudden conquest, but through a gradual process of territorial acquisition that reflected the Parthians' pragmatic approach to imperial expansion and their understanding of Mesopotamia's strategic importance as a buffer zone against Roman expansion. The Parthian military system that enabled their conquest of Mesopotamia represented a revolutionary approach to warfare that combined traditional Iranian nomadic tactics with innovations borrowed from settled civilizations. The backbone of Parthian armies consisted of heavily armoured cavalry units known as cataphracts, mounted warriors encased in scale armour and wielding long lances who could deliver devastating charges against enemy formations. These elite units, drawn from the Parthian nobility and equipped at enormous expense, possessed tactical capabilities that proved highly effective against both infantry formations and light cavalry forces. The cataphracts' horses, bred specifically for size and strength, were also protected by armour that covered their heads, necks and flanks, creating an almost impenetrable barrier that could smash through enemy lines while remaining relatively immune to conventional weapons. Complementing the heavy cavalry were units of mounted archers whose tactical mobility and firepower revolutionized battlefield dynamics throughout the ancient world. These warriors, equipped with powerful composite bows and trained from childhood in the demanding art of mounted archery, could deliver accurate fire while moving at full gallop. The famous Parthian shot, where archers would turn in their saddles to fire at pursuing enemies while retreating, became a legendary tactic that demoralized opponents and demonstrated the extraordinary skill of Parthian horsemen. The combination of heavy and light cavalry created tactical flexibility that enabled Parthian commanders to adapt their strategies to different opponents and battlefield conditions while maintaining the mobility that had traditionally characterized Iranian warfare. The Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of Parthian military tactics against Roman forces and established the military reputation that would define Parthian-Roman relations for centuries. The Roman army under Marcus Licinius Crassus, consisting of approximately 40,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry, encountered a Parthian force of roughly 10,000 mounted warriors under the command of Surena, a young nobleman who had recently distinguished himself in campaigns against nomadic tribes. The battle unfolded on the flat plains near the town of Carrhae, terrain that favoured cavalry operations and negated the advantages typically enjoyed by Roman infantry formations. The Parthian tactical approach at Carrhae involved using mounted archers to harass Roman formations while avoiding direct engagement with the disciplined infantry. The Roman soldiers, organised in their traditional manipular formations and protected by large shields, initially withstood the arrow bombardment while attempting to close with their tormentors. However, the Parthian archers maintained their distance through superior mobility, continuously circling the Roman formation while delivering accurate fire that gradually wore down the defenders. The Romans' attempts to charge the Parthian lines were met by devastating cataphract attacks that shattered their formations and inflicted heavy casualties on the exposed troops. The psychological impact of the Parthian victory at Carrhae extended far beyond its immediate military consequences, establishing a pattern of Roman-Parthian conflict that would characterise their relationship for the next 3 centuries. The death of Crassus and the destruction of his army eliminated one of Rome's most powerful political figures, while demonstrating that Roman military supremacy was not absolute. The capture of Roman military standards, including the legionary eagles that symbolised Roman military honour, provided the Parthians with powerful propaganda tools that reinforced their legitimacy while humiliating their enemies. The ransom negotiations that followed the battle established diplomatic protocols that would govern subsequent Roman-Parthian interactions, while creating precedents for prisoner exchanges and territorial agreements. The administrative system that the Parthians established in Mesopotamia reflected their understanding of the region's complex cultural heritage and their pragmatic approach to imperial governance. Rather than imposing uniform administrative structures throughout their territories, the Parthians developed a feudal system that granted considerable autonomy to local rulers while maintaining overall imperial control through a network of vassalage relationships. The Mesopotamian territories were divided among various client kings and regional governors who maintained their own military forces and administrative apparatus, while acknowledging Parthian suzerainty and providing tribute to the imperial treasury. The city of Ctesiphon, established on the east bank of the Tigris River opposite the Hellenistic city of Seleucia, became the Parthian administrative centre for Mesopotamia and eventually evolved into one of the largest cities in the ancient world. The site's strategic location, positioned at the narrowest point between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers where major trade routes converged, provided significant commercial advantages while offering defensive benefits against potential Roman attacks. The city's rapid growth, supported by imperial investment and commercial prosperity, attracted populations from throughout the Parthian Empire, while creating a cosmopolitan urban centre that blended Iranian, Mesopotamian, and Hellenistic cultural traditions. The architecture of Ctesiphon reflected the synthesis of diverse cultural influences that characterized Parthian imperial culture. The famous Tak Kasra, a massive barrel-vaulted hall that served as the royal audience chamber, demonstrated innovative engineering techniques that combined Iranian architectural concepts with Mesopotamian construction methods. The structure, built from fired brick and measuring approximately 37 metres in width and 30 metres in height, created an interior space of unprecedented scale that could accommodate thousands of courtiers and visitors during royal ceremonies. The vault's construction, achieved without the use of supporting columns, required sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles and represented one of the most remarkable architectural achievements of the ancient world. The decorative programs that adorned Parthian royal buildings incorporated artistic elements from multiple cultural traditions, while developing distinctive stylistic characteristics that reflected the empire's multicultural character. Stucco reliefs depicting royal hunting scenes, court ceremonies, and mythological narratives combined Iranian thematic content with Hellenistic artistic techniques and Mesopotamian iconographic traditions. The use of bright colours, including blues, reds, and gold leaf, created visual effects that enhanced the ceremonial impact of royal architecture, while demonstrating the wealth and cultural sophistication that had emerged from imperial prosperity. The economic transformation that occurred under Parthian rule reflected the empire's position as a crucial link between the Roman world and the emerging trade networks of Central Asia and the Far East. The Silk Road, the network of trade routes that connected China with the Mediterranean world, passed through Parthian territories and generated enormous revenues through customs duties and commercial taxes. Mesopotamian cities, particularly Ctesiphon and Seleucia, became major commercial centres where goods from distant regions were exchanged, processed, and redistributed to markets throughout the ancient world. The prosperity generated by this commerce supported urban growth and cultural development, while providing the resources necessary for maintaining the military forces that defended the empire against Roman attacks. The monetary system that developed under Parthian rule reflected the empire's commercial orientation and its integration into international trade networks. Parthian coins, minted in silver and featuring portraits of Arsacid kings surrounded by Greek inscriptions, maintained connections to Hellenistic monetary traditions while incorporating Iranian royal iconography. The standardization of weights and denominations across the empire facilitated commercial transactions, while ensuring that Parthian currency remained acceptable in international markets. The development of sophisticated banking systems, including the use of credit instruments and letters of exchange, enabled merchants to conduct business across vast distances while minimizing the risks associated with transporting precious metals. The cultural developments that occurred under Parthian rule demonstrated the empire's commitment to preserving local traditions while encouraging cultural synthesis and innovation. The Parthian court, while maintaining Iranian political and ceremonial traditions, patronized scholars and artists from diverse cultural backgrounds who contributed to the empire's intellectual and artistic achievements. The establishment of libraries and educational institutions in major cities created centers for scholarly activity that preserved ancient Mesopotamian literary traditions, while facilitating cultural exchange with other parts of the empire and the broader ancient world. The religious policies implemented by Parthian rulers reflected their understanding of the importance of maintaining social stability through respect for established religious traditions. The Parthians, who practiced Zoroastrianism as their state religion, demonstrated remarkable tolerance for the diverse religious practices of their subjects while encouraging syncretistic developments that created new forms of religious expression. Traditional Mesopotamian deities continue to receive worship and patronage, while Greek religious concepts introduced during the Hellenistic period were preserved and integrated into local religious systems. The development of new religious movements, including various forms of Gnosticism and early Christianity, reflected the creative religious environment that emerged from this cultural synthesis. The gradual decline of cuneiform writing during the Parthian period marked one of the most significant cultural transformations in Mesopotamian history. The ancient writing system that had served Mesopotamian civilization for over 3 millennia gradually gave way to alphabetic scripts that were better suited to the multilingual environment of the Parthian Empire. Aramaic, written in alphabetic script and serving as the empire's administrative language, became increasingly dominant in official documents and commercial transactions. Greek continued to be used in scholarly and literary contexts, particularly in cities with substantial Hellenistic populations, while various Iranian languages employed different alphabetic systems for local administrative purposes. The decline of cuneiform represented more than a simple change in writing technology. It reflected the gradual transformation of Mesopotamian cultural identity that had been occurring since the Persian conquest. The complex syllabic system that had required years of training to master became increasingly impractical in a multilingual empire, where administrative efficiency demanded simpler and more flexible writing systems. The last known cuneiform texts, dating to the 1st century CE, were produced by temple scribes who maintained traditional practices for religious purposes, while the broader society had already adopted alphabetic writing for practical communication. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamian sites during the Parthian period reveals a complex pattern of urban decline and transformation that reflected the changing political and economic circumstances of the region. Many ancient cities that had flourished under previous empires experienced population decline and reduced construction activity as political centres shifted to new locations and trade routes were redirected through different commercial hubs. The abandonment of certain districts within traditional urban centres, combined with the establishment of new settlements in strategically important locations, created a transformed urban landscape that reflected the priorities of Parthian imperial administration. The city of Babylon, which had served as a major political and cultural centre for over a millennium, experienced gradual decline during the Parthian period, as its functions were transferred to newer administrative centres. Archaeological excavations reveal that large areas of the city were abandoned during the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, with residential districts becoming depopulated and major public buildings falling into disrepair. The famous hanging gardens, if they had indeed existed, were no longer maintained, while the great ziggurats of Etemenanki gradually deteriorated from neglect. The city's decline reflected broader changes in Mesopotamian political organisation that favoured newer urban centres over traditional seats of power. The transformation of Seleucia on the Tigris during the Parthian period illustrated the complex relationship between continuity and change that characterised Mesopotamian urban development. The city, originally established as a Hellenistic foundation, maintained its Greek character while adapting to Parthian political control and the changing economic circumstances of the region. Archaeological evidence reveals continued construction activity and population growth during the early Parthian period, followed by gradual decline as the nearby city of Ctesiphon assumed greater political and economic importance. The eventual abandonment of significant portions of Seleucia reflected the broader pattern of urban transformation that characterized Mesopotamian development during this period. The material culture that emerged during the Parthian period demonstrated the synthesis of diverse cultural traditions that characterized the empire's multicultural society. Pottery styles combined traditional Mesopotamian forms with decorative elements borrowed from Iranian, Greek, and Central Asian artistic traditions. Metalwork, including weapons, jewellery, and ceremonial objects, incorporated technical innovations that reflected the empire's extensive trade connections while maintaining regional stylistic characteristics. Textile production, enhanced by access to silk and other luxury materials through Silk Road commerce, created new forms of decorative art that influenced fashion and artistic expression throughout the ancient world. The artistic achievements of the Parthian period reflected the empire's cultural sophistication and its ability to synthesize diverse artistic traditions into distinctive new forms of expression. Sculpture, particularly the relief carvings that decorated royal buildings and religious monuments, combined Iranian thematic content with Hellenistic artistic techniques and Mesopotamian iconographic traditions. The development of new sculptural styles, characterized by frontal poses and elaborate decorative details, created artistic expressions that influenced subsequent artistic development throughout the Near East and Central Asia. The scientific and intellectual achievements of the Parthian period built upon the foundations established by earlier Mesopotamian civilizations, while incorporating knowledge acquired through international contacts. Astronomical observations, conducted in temple complexes and court observatories, continued the traditions of mathematical astronomy that had been developed during the Neo-Babylonian period. The preservation and transmission of ancient Mesopotamian scientific texts, combined with new observations and theoretical developments, maintained Mesopotamian leadership in astronomical knowledge, while contributing to the broader development of scientific understanding throughout the ancient world. The rise of the Sassanid Empire in 224 CE marked the end of Parthian rule and the beginning of the final transformation of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. The Sassanid conquest, accomplished through a combination of military force and political maneuvering, established a new Iranian dynasty that would govern Mesopotamia for the next 4 centuries, while implementing administrative and cultural policies that differed significantly from those of their Parthian predecessors. The Sassanid emphasis on centralized administration and religious orthodoxy created governmental systems that reduced local autonomy while promoting cultural homogenization throughout their territories. The legacy of ancient Mesopotamian civilization, preserved and transmitted through the various political transformations that had occurred over more than 3 millennia, continued to influence human development long after the disappearance of the last cuneiform texts and the abandonment of the great cities that had once dominated the alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The legal principles first codified in Hammurabi's law code provided foundations for subsequent legal systems throughout the ancient world, while the administrative techniques developed by Mesopotamian bureaucrats influenced imperial governance from the Roman Empire to medieval Islamic states. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge that had been accumulated by Mesopotamian scholars over centuries of systematic observation and analysis provided crucial foundations for the development of scientific understanding throughout the ancient world. The sexagesimal number system, the division of the circle into 360 degrees, and the mathematical techniques for calculating planetary positions and predicting eclipses all originated in Mesopotamian scholarly traditions and continued to influence mathematical and astronomical development for centuries after the end of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. The literary achievements of ancient Mesopotamia, including the Epic of Gilgamesh and the various creation myths that had been preserved in cuneiform libraries, provided thematic and structural models that influenced literary development throughout the ancient world. The preservation of these works in Greek and Aramaic translations ensured their transmission to subsequent civilizations, while their themes of heroism, mortality, and the relationship between humans and gods continued to resonate with audiences across cultural boundaries. The urban planning principles and architectural techniques that had been developed in Mesopotamian cities provided models for urban development throughout the ancient world. The concept of the city as a unified political and economic entity, the development of sophisticated infrastructure systems, including water supply and waste management, and the integration of residential, commercial, and religious districts, all originated in Mesopotamian urban planning and influenced city development from the Roman Empire to medieval Islamic civilization. The agricultural innovations that had enabled Mesopotamian civilization to flourish in the challenging environment of the alluvial plains provided technical knowledge that continued to influence farming practices throughout the ancient world. The development of irrigation systems, the techniques for managing soil salinity, and the methods for coordinating agricultural production across large territories all originated in Mesopotamian agricultural practice and provided foundations for agricultural development in other regions with similar environmental challenges. Thus ended the long history of ancient Mesopotamian civilization, a remarkable human achievement that had transformed a challenging natural environment into the cradle of urban life, writing, law, and countless other innovations that would shape human development for millennia to come. From the earliest agricultural settlements of the Neolithic period to the cosmopolitan cities of the Parthian Empire, Mesopotamia had served as a laboratory for human social organization and cultural development, creating institutional frameworks and intellectual traditions that would influence civilization long after the last cuneiform tablet had been inscribed and the great cities had been abandoned to the desert sands. The legacy of this ancient civilization continues to influence human society today, a testament to the remarkable achievements of the peoples who first learned to harness the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and create the foundations of civilized life.